llamados Bird&Bird, y también miembro del Rail Working Group. Doy la bienvenida en nombre del despacho que tiene el placer de organizar este evento junto con el Rail Working Group. I'm going to switch into English also for the benefit of our English speakers. Welcome everybody this afternoon. My name is José Luis Lorente. I'm a partner with Bird&Bird in Madrid. I'm also a member of the Rail Working Group. As many of you know, it's a non-profit organization that promotes the adoption and implementation of the Rail Luxembourg Protocol, which is a very interesting piece of regulation and international treaty, part of the Cape Town Convention on International Interest in relation to mobile equipment, particularly in relation to the equipment known as, and that we'll discuss later, rolling stock. As probably you know, there's 3 other protocols relating to aircraft already ratified by Spain, and there are other 2, which is the Space Protocol and the MAC Protocol in relation to mining, agriculture, and construction. Teresa Naceras here, she's the actual total expert on this field, so if anyone wants to have a word with her, she'll be delighted to speak about these other developments of the Cape Town Convention. But here we are today to discuss on the imminent entry into force in Spain of the annexing of the 2nd protocol for rolling stock, which will establish enforceable interests, recognizable consistently throughout different jurisdictions over this type of rail stock, which will notably facilitate access to credit in the rail sector. And why are we here today? Why is it important to talk about this now? Well, in December 2022, Spain, Kingdom of Spain, finalized the deposit of the instrument of ratification of the Rail Luxembourg Protocol, and with this, it put into motion the entry into force of this treaty in Spain once the international registry becomes operative. So today we have the legal community, we have the registrars, we have manufacturers, infrastructure, we have financiers, and it's in this event, the purpose is to discuss, how do we prepare ourselves? What is, to start with, this piece of treaty, of international treaty, what is the Rail Luxembourg Protocol, how does it work, what is its current status, and what is the importance of the ratification by Spain? Importance, obviously, because of our key, being a key player in the manufacture of rail stock and also of IT services and other operative and maintenance services related to the sector, but also which has enormous potential, as we know, in the exporting this technology to other countries, as Spain has very successfully done in the last years, but also internally, as will help us to complete the ongoing process of liberalization of the rail sector in Spain, in line with the successive rail packages, and to complete what is called the European Single Railway Area. So with this, we'll discuss the importance of Spain ratifying this and whether or not there are any adaptations. Do we need to localize? Do we need to make any sort of urgent measures of adopting and amending maybe existing regulation in Spain in order to accommodate the entry into force of this rail protocol? So these are many other possibly very interesting questions that we're going to try and answer today. So I would like now to also hand over to to Ignacio Tirado, who is the Secretary General for UNIDRAC, the International Institute for the Unification of Private Law, and he's very well placed to give us also a brief introduction about the Luxembourg Rail Protocol. Ignacio, the floor is yours.
Buenas tardes. Thank you, José Luis. Apologies, I cannot be in Madrid today. I am addressing you from Rome, where UNIDRAC is based. I understand the language of the event is fully in English, so double apology for that. I will be very brief because I think on the specifics and Howard and others will be briefing you, and no one better than Howard Rosen to talk about the legal features of the protocol and why it's so important. So I will not steal any time from him. I just want to convey a few very relevant ideas of what I think are very relevant ideas. First of all, on the 8th of March, God willing, the protocol will come into force, and this is a huge achievement for UNIDRAC and for everyone that's in the UNIDRAC family that's been working hard trying to make this protocol a reality. I'm talking here about more than 16 years from the moment in which the Luxembourg Protocol was approved. I should say that this is not necessarily anything surprising. Treaties sometimes get a long time to come into force. Think, for example, of the probably most successful legal treaty ever, which is the New York Convention. The New York Convention took, I think, 20 to 30 years to have a decent number of ratifications. Now everyone's ratified the New York Convention. So it's treaties require the right moment to start flying, and I think it has now. It is a high time that we can say the Rail Protocol will be in that moment, in that situation. So it is also a big pleasure for me that ultimately, and in a very good way, directly related, it's my country, Spain, that is going to cause the Rail Protocol to finally come into force. A bit of Spanish pride I will indulge in, if you will allow me. And for that, again, I would very much like to thank everyone involved in the process of ratification in Spain, which was done mostly by the Ministry of Transport, at least that's where it originated, which is normally the usual counterparty for the Rail Protocol, but not necessarily the usual counterparty with UNIDRAC, because we normally deal with the Ministry of Justice or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I should say dealings were very easy, streamlined, and we had the luck of working with excellent professionals. So word of gratitude on that front too. All conditions are now in place for the Rail Protocol in the slipstream of the success of the aircraft protocol to become a massive success, even to become more successful than the aircraft protocol. And I'm talking here, we are about to count the 87th member state very soon for the aircraft protocol. And I believe, I'm convinced, it's only a matter of time that rail, as perhaps also later MAC, Mine, Agriculture and Construction Protocol, will overtake aircraft. Why? The reason is that, of course, the aircraft industry is here to stay, obviously, but it has reached a level of growth which some people argue is its peak. And the reason for that are sustainability reasons and other reasons as well. But in the terms of rail development, we are at the other end. Believe it or not, and I'm sure most of you know this already, there are many, many countries in the global south, which is where the growth potential is, which have completely deficient, if they have at all, a railroad system. And therefore, the potential for growth there is immense. For example, let me give you a very quick example. Paraguay is about to ratify the rail protocol. Paraguay doesn't have a railroad system. It's about to start building it again. They had it and then they lost it. If you go to Asunción, you see that one of the things they show you as a tourist is the old rail track. So everything is still there to be done. And the rail protocol is exactly the right legal tool to achieve that aim, because it allows for cross-border investment, allowing therefore countries to spend their public resources on building the rail track so that the private sector can take care of the wagons and of the machinery generally. Because of the sustainable development trend, which is again, fortunately here to stay, the development of rail investment is supported institutionally, basically by every organization that counts. We will have the opportunity now to listen to Mr. Mussini, I believe, talk about the European approach. The European Union has been a key stakeholder supporting the rail protocol, and we congratulate ourselves for that. But beyond the European Union, I think what's even more relevant is the extraordinary support that's been given to the rail protocol by the United Nations, mostly the United Nations Economic Commissions. For example, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa is one of the main stakeholders promoting the treaty in the African region, where again the possibility of linking the different capitals by rail is an aspiration of the UN and of ours as well, and that would really be a game changer for the world, not just for Africa. So lots to look forward to, and I'm very happy that Spain has been the country that is making this crack on. Having a quick look at the situation in Spain, first, I think it's also in order to show our gratitude and to the Cuerpo de Registradores Mercantiles y de la Propiedad, so the registrars in Spain, who are extremely sophisticated professionals who do their job marvelously and who have a level of IT which is absolutely top. Well, it's through the registrars that we are going to make this happen, and we are very happy and thankful for that, because we are aware, of course, that the type of registry that's being used here corresponds with a different approach to registries, and therefore the openness of the registrars is particularly appreciated. Of course, Spain has a legislation and a system of security interest of immovables, which is fine, but it's also possibly could be subject to improvement. It's a bit dispersed, it's a bit old in some parts, could be improved. And having the rail protocol apply in Spain, I think will help facilitate access to credit in this area clearly, because of the legal certainty and the more efficient system that it provides. Has nothing to do with the institutional part, but rather with the legal framework itself. So again, this can help Spain much, I think. But quite frankly, where the rail protocol can be very important is to support the Spanish industry in their investments abroad. Whenever our big companies want to go abroad to invest in the development of the railway systems, the fact that these countries have also ratified Cape Town would be extremely important, I believe, for this export activity. So I encourage those in the room and those that are actually in charge of this type of investments to lobby together with us to the governments in those countries where our companies are investing and are considering increasing their investment activities in the railway system. So that's something we can do with them, and I'll help them. And we see very important possible gain for the industry there. I think I should pretty much end here. We are about to see other countries join the rail family. Paraguay, as I said, the United Kingdom is very much advanced. South Africa is almost there. Those two countries, South Africa and the UK, by themselves will have a huge influence in other countries, especially South Africa in the African region. So this is the right time, is the right instrument, and we strongly support the Rail Working Group and the Spanish chapter of the Rail Working Group, and we are very grateful for the organization of this event and for everything that we'll do thereafter. Thank you, gracias, and I will be here listening to your wonderful interventions.
I guess it's my turn.
Go ahead.
Okay, then.
Partner at Musk and Partners.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jose, and thank you, of course, Howard, for having me here today with you. I think I'm going to give you a little bit the perspective, and in not many minutes, but a little bit the perspective of a public affairs professional with a strong background in rail that is working with Howard at EU level since quite a few years. And what I wanted to tell you today is a little bit about the nature, the pedagogic nature of the efforts that we're doing at EU level to really explain how the protocol works, what the protocol is, and what are the benefits that can actually provide. Because the protocol, I mean, and Howard is a brilliant teacher when it comes to explaining how the protocol works and what can it brings, but still it is a complex matter. And this is why I'm calling pedagogic the effort that we're doing here. It's not about really regulatory lobbying or other possible services that are usual in this town, but it's really about explaining what it is and what it does. And of course, we operated in the last years on having in the background two big problems that, of course, justify even more the sense of the protocol. The one is the challenge of sustainability. And of course, we spent the last 5 years dealing with the European Green Deal and dealing with the, all the efforts that the EU has put in place to pursue the climate objectives and achieve those objectives and really fight against global warming. And in this context, the core railways had a very special place. And that was the first, let's say, type of background. The second type of background is also as much clear, which is the scarcity of public budget. And the fact that we are not able to finance everything that we need to achieve the sustainability goals that we have. And this is why we have to look out of public budgets and look at private resources and really create a regulatory environment that favors the presence of private resources on sustainable projects. This is a little bit, this has been the sense of the EU strategy on sustainable finance. But this, again, is also a good background to explain why the protocol is today all the more necessary and is today really one, not the only one, but certainly one important piece of the solution that we have to put into place. And we did this work of telling about the protocol in different directions, of course. We dealt with EU institutions. We engaged also with the rail sector. You know that Brussels is a town populated not only by institutions, but also by industrial organizations and associations and other stakeholders for that matter. And this is why from Brussels, we not only had to deal with EU institutions, but also with the rail sectors that is present in Brussels, and also with other sectors that, of course, have a pertinence when it comes to the protocol. When it comes to the institutions, if I can give you just a few examples Of course, the conversation is dense with DG Move, which is the Director General of the European Commission that deals with transport and mobility. And then, of course, I mean, we could count on their support, and yet, of course, their support was not, let's say, the only one that we needed in order really to achieve the targets, which at the end of the day are the member states. And this is why, thanks to Ignacio, to remember that we need to continue these lobbying efforts towards the governments so that the ratification process goes on even after the 8th of March. So we dealt with DG Move, we dealt with DG INPA. And again, I mean, these different interlocutors show a little bit the different aspects of importance of the protocol, which is multifaceted, as we know. DG INPA is the Director General of the European Commission that deals with what it is the, let's say, current major development policy of the European Commission, which is the Global Gateway, is this initiative to promote, let's say, European investments abroad and the European standards abroad, also in terms of sustainability. Within this global gateway, there is a huge component dedicated also to transport connectivity. And within it, of course, again, for the reasons I explained before, rail is important and plays an important role. The global gateway is particularly oriented towards Africa and investments in the African continent. And I think that in a recent conversation, of course, the Commission realized that, you know, there was certainly a lot of attention on the rail infrastructure. There was a little bit of attention on rail rolling stock, but of course, again, this was a good opportunity for us to explain how the protocol can really complement the global gateway in providing better resources also for rail rolling stock. We are dealing with DG Trade. The DG Trade is in the process of drafting an important EU strategy on export credits. And then again, this is, in fact, let's say it's co-managed by DG Trade and DG INPA, the one I mentioned before. And ultimately, we're dealing with DG Regio, the one that is governing the regional policy of the European Union, and are now in rethinking a little bit the regulations that govern the European Structural Investments Funds, and of course within it, again, the attention to rail rolling stock financing arose, and we have also this conversation ongoing. Again, apart from the institutions, the efforts were dedicated also to talk to the rail sector, and the rail sector is represented in Brussels by many organizations, by the Community of European Railways, by AllRail, by the European Rail Freight Association, by UITP, Eurofima, UIC, UIP, all these acronyms. I'm not going to explain every single one of them because otherwise I'm going to take 40 minutes, but just to tell you that, of course, the whole sector is represented, and all single subsectors, so freight and passenger and infrastructure managers, are represented in Brussels, and these constitute, of course, interlocutors that are necessary and allies that we need in order to be sure that the message is echoed also vis-a-vis the sector, and through that vis-a-vis the capitals. And even beyond the rail sector, I think that we had, let's say, the chance to engage with the banking sector, certainly. We have been cooperating with the European Banking Federation, especially on one dossier, on Basel III, on the revision of Basel III rules, and the specific provisions on specialized lending exposures for object financing. Again, another important piece of the puzzle that we have to put together in order to, let's say, be able to count on a better regulatory framework in general. We have been dealing with Transport Community, which is an organization constituted by the Commission and which is today headquartered in Belgrade, in Serbia, and that really tries to create an harmonic regulatory framework in the Western Balkans. And again, it is a conversation where we are trying to explain how also those states can benefit, that are in dire needs of rolling stock, can benefit of the ratification, from the ratification of the protocol. And and then, of course, another front is development banks and public banks. And again, we have been opening a conversation with European Investment Bank. And again, I think it's a front that will bring, let's say, that will bear fruits and will bring positive outcomes in terms of the visibility of the work we're doing, the visibility of the protocol, and to conclude, I think that, again, the effort after the 8th of March would have to be to continue these kind of conversations, having always in mind that probably the priority number one is going to develop further the ratification of the protocol. But let's say that after the 8th of March, we will have one or many more ammunition, in the sense that we will be able to see and measure and assess again how the protocol after the entry into force of the registry will work, what the benefits will bring to the companies. And those are all cases that we will have to treasure and bring to the attention of our next interlocutors.
Thank you, Matteo.
Mil gracias.
Now we're going to have the honor of explanation by Howard Rosen, Chairman of the Rail Working Group.
I should just have to hold it. It's okay. At least it's not just me. Buenas tardes. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here. My name is Howard Rosen. I'm the chairman of the Rail Working Group. I've been involved with this whole project to develop an international treaty that will make it easier and cheaper for the private sector to finance railway equipment. I've been involved with this for 26 years. You're not going to believe that. I know I only look 35, but I'm actually older. And it's amazing that we've got to the point that we have today. In 10 days' time, 10 days to go, in 10 days' time, the Luxembourg Rail Protocol enters into force in contracting states. And as we'll explain to you during the course of the afternoon, this has an impact not just in the contracting states, but in many surrounding states, even before they ratify. And as Ignacio mentioned before, there are more ratifications on the way. So I need my clicker. Thank you. Thank you very much. Hopefully I can make this work. So what I'd like to do before we even start is to just say thank you. Thank you, firstly, to Bird&Bird for hosting this event, which is much appreciated. And the colleagues here from Bird&Bird, particularly Benjamin, who's coming from Frankfurt, Jose Luis, obviously based here, you've been amazing supporters, and it's appreciated. And it's been a pleasure and an honor to work with you both. We have a very strong, warm relationship with the company. I know that they're going to develop even more expertise in rail finance in the future, and I wish them well. I also must thank and want to thank our other two speakers, Matteo, who has been an excellent support for us in Brussels, coordinating between all the different rail organizations based there that are looking out into the future as to how the rail industry is going to develop. And also, of course, to thank very much Ignacio and his team at Unidroit, who have just been extraordinary. Again, it's been a huge honor to work with them. I'm just a practicing lawyer. I've learned a lot working with Unidroit over the years. It's been an enriching experience for me personally, I have to say. But also, it's been extraordinary to see how we've created something out of nothing. And in 10 days' time, the rail industry is going to change, and it will never be the same again. So what I want to give you today is a little bit of an insight, just very quickly, to just make sure that for some of you who don't maybe know everything about the Rail Working Group, just to know, so you know who we are, also to give you a quick tour of the Luxembourg Rail Protocol, to put it into context, to explain how it actually works and what we expect to happen on the 10th of, sorry, on the 8th of March. And what we will look at also is the prospects for the implementation of the protocol. We'll look at the benefits that will accrue from the protocol, and then finally look at the things that we have to think about now going forward, bearing in mind that we know that the protocol is with us. So firstly, let me just explain a little bit about us. We're an international organization, but we're based in Switzerland. We're a not-for-profit. I moved too fast there. We're a not-for-profit organization. I think I need to go back. Okay, can I go back? Yes, I can go back. We've been around since 1996, and we're dedicated to the adoption of the Luxembourg Rail Protocol. We all work for free. This is I call this my full-time hobby. I have a real job, being a private practicing lawyer. We have over 80 members, direct members, and then we have many industry organisations which are part of the Rail Working Group. I'm pleased to tell you, I can tell you today, because they've just been accepted today, that Stadler, for example, has just joined us as a member. That's a big step forward. They're one of the major rolling stock manufacturers in Europe, and an innovative, exciting company. And there are some innovative and exciting Spanish manufacturers, I'm pleased to say. So we are representing all sorts of parts of the rail industry. And we have contact groups all over the world. We have regional groups as well as country groups. We have a coordinating committee in Brussels, and we work very closely with many governments and many intergovernmental organisations, including both the UN Economic Commission for Europe, Economic Commission for Africa. We're working very closely with the African Union, and as Ignacio mentioned before, if there was ever a need for railways, it was in Africa. And this is one of the areas where the protocol is going to make an enormous difference. Let's see if I can move us on. So, the international treaty, that is the Luxembourg Rail Protocol, it creates a new global system for the rights and priorities of creditors. And it covers three types of security interests. So it's the right of the lessor who's leasing equipment, whether the lease is a 1-minute lease or a 10-year lease or a 35-year lease. It covers the rights of the lessor. It covers the rights of a financier, a creditor who's taking security over rolling stock. And it also covers the rights of a vendor selling railway equipment under a conditional sale agreement, where he has a retention of title, and that is a type of security interest. Now, what it does is it creates a system of rights for those creditors. It particularly gives them specific rights on on debtor insolvency or default, and it applies when the debtor is in a contracting state. We'll come back to that a little bit later. It introduces, for the first time, an international public registry that is going to be operating 24/7 through the internet, which will register the international interests and security interests of these three types of creditors, publicly available through the internet. And at the same time, it creates a system for the first time of uniquely identifying rolling stock. People often make the comparison between aircraft and rolling stock. And the two disadvantages that the rail industry has traditionally had has been that, unlike the aviation industry, there are no national registers where you can register your mortgages or your security interests. Unlike the aviation industry, there is no common system for identifying railway rolling stock. We know that in the aviation sector, there's somewhere in the region of 105,000 aircraft, which are all identified through the manufacturer's name, model number, and serial number. that doesn't work on the railway side. There are potentially thousands of manufacturers of rolling stock. You have perhaps, last quote I saw was 6 million items of railway rolling stock. It's probably much more than that now. And there's no common system for identifying the equipment, even within Europe, let alone worldwide. So the protocol introduces for the first time a unique identifier for every item in the railway rolling stock. Okay, so what's important to bear in mind is that the protocol applies to all types of railway rolling stock, very broadly defined. So it's defined as a vehicle that runs on tracks or above, on or under a guideway. So it's not just your conventional locomotives and passenger wagons and freight wagons. It's trams, it's metro trains, it's people movers at airports. It's those metro trains that run on tyres rather than on tracks. It's covering all sorts of different equipment. Now, I just want to point out, however, just for clarity, that that picture on the far right there of the horse tram, the horse is called Rocky, by the way, and this is the horse tram in the Isle of Man, and the tram is covered by the Luxembourg Rail Protocol, but the horse isn't. So there were two conditions for the entry into force of the protocol: 4 ratifications, which we now have. Spain became the 4th ratification, and then OTIF, the International Rail Organization based in Bern, has to certify that the international registry is ready to operate, and that has meant an extensive process, firstly of commissioning the creation of a new entity, a new international registry, with all the conditions and objectives that we had to set out contractually, negotiating that contract, dealing with the personnel, organizing the regulations, and making sure that the registry is actually able to deliver. And that's the certificate OT will deliver in 10 days' time. Should be putting this somewhere, not quite sure where. Maybe I put it better. So, as we know, there are 4 states that have already ratified. There are 2 more on the way. I would say, with no disrespect, that in a way, South Africa's ratification is incredibly significant for Africa. I'll explain why. Firstly, South Africa constitutes somewhere in the region of 2/5 of the entire rail network in Africa. It's the most sophisticated rail system. It's a thought leader in Africa anyway. South Africa has been designated as the center for rolling stock manufacture in Africa. It is now pioneering the whole concept of open access, particularly on freight, which is something very new for Africa. But then South Africa is in a network. The rail systems in Southern Africa all run on one gauge, Cape gauge, with the exception of the Gautrain between Johannesburg and Pretoria. Everything else runs on Cape gauge. So there's a system that runs between South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Eswatini, Mozambique, Namibia, and I'm sure I've missed one country. So you have a system which is an integrated rail system. So the ability to move the system, move the rolling stock around that system is of course very important. With the Luxembourg Protocol being adopted by South Africa, it's going through the second House of Parliament at the moment, the ratification, and then it'll go live. That will be an enormous influence on other countries around South Africa to actually move forward with ratification. And a number of countries are working on ratification, other countries have signed already, and just last week the UK announced its draft rail reform bill, which includes provision for the UK government to move forward with the ratification of the protocol. So things are moving. Going on here. Go back. So, as I mentioned before, what the protocol delivers is an international registry. It's the first global public registry dealing with security interests in railway rolling stock. It's based in Luxembourg. It's run by a large Canadian company called ISC. They have 500 employees, quoted on the Toronto Stock Exchange, partially owned by the province of Saskatchewan. Highly expert company involved all of their time in running international registries. And they will also be ensuring that they have a functioning website, not just for registering, but also providing information about the protocol, including, for example, which states are contracting states, what their declarations are, and as we'll come back to in a minute, declarations concerning the UN model rules on marking of rolling stock. And it operates under a detailed set of regulations and procedures. And there's been a lot of work that's been undertaken over the last few months, making sure that the regulations are absolutely correct and ready to go. And we believe that they are. And we'll find out after the 8th of March. But certainly everything is now ready to proceed. The International Registry is overseen by a supervisory authority. This is a new intergovernmental organisation that will be set up by the Luxembourg Rail Protocol. It will comprise of all the contracting states and then other states that have been at the moment co-opted onto the intergovernmental panel, and then gradually they will be replaced by ratifying states. So it will start with 10 states as constituent members of the supervisory authority. It comes into existence on the 8th of March, and it will be the organisation that issues the fee schedules, will issue the regulations, the protocols, and deal with other matters that will arise from the operation of the International Registry. And at that point, once the registry is operating, you will be able to register and inspect international interests being registered there. Now, the way that the system works is going to be explained after the break in much more detail by Kathy Hillman in relation to the details of adopting users so they can actually have access to the international registry. But what's important to bear in mind is that anybody who has access to the registry can actually influence the legal rights of parties. So they have to be carefully authenticated. You can't just walk in off the street and make a registration. And then what ISC are working on and what the Regulus, the actual registrar, will be doing is creating a system for authenticating people's access. So the multi-factor authentication access system will be operating from the very beginning on the international registry. When the debtor is Spanish, in accordance with the Spanish declarations, an authorized entry code will be required for registrations from the Registry of Movable Goods. The registration usually will need debtor consent. There are a couple of exceptions to that, which I'll get back to during the course of the afternoon. And the searches are open to anyone. So from that point of view, it's public access. As far as the costs are concerned, these are being set by the supervisory authority. Those costs are not official yet because they have to be adopted by the supervisory authority. But let's put it this way: I have it on very strong authority that the registration fees will be about 20 euros per item, and the search fees will be about 15 euros per item.
Okay. Howard, just to explain it in Spanish, because we have the registrar here from el Registro de Bienes Muebles. Y es un punto muy importante, porque en las declaraciones de ratificación de España se identifica el Registro de Bienes Muebles como el punto de acceso autorizante al registro internacional que está explicando Howard. Es un sistema muy similar, que no idéntico, y luego hablaremos de las diferencias, con el sistema que ya existe para el registro de aeronaves, el código único autorizante. Pero bueno, me parece importante que usted pues, pueda ir ya pensando sobre las decisiones y lo que hay que organizar de aquí al 8 de marzo para que bueno, pues, pueda coordinarse con ese registro internacional que entra en vigor el 8 de mayo.
Thank you. I definitely couldn't have said that in Spanish. Okay. Let's move on. So, as we've explained before, it's imperative that the rolling stock is uniquely identified to be able to register and to hold your rights on an item of railway rolling stock. It's the most extraordinary thing that rolling stock hasn't had a unique identifier up until now. Your computer, some of you got in front of you, your telephones, ships, containers, cars, all have unique identifiers, permanent identifiers which never change. That's not the case in the railway industry. You can ask why, and we could have a discussion about that. But the reality is, it does, as of today, it doesn't exist. On the 8th of March, it will. For the first time, the International Registry will be able to issue unique numbers. It will be a 16-digit number, including a check digit. Once it's used, it will never be used again. And 16 digits gives us a few billion numbers to play with. And it has to be fixed permanently on the railway rolling stock. So it's not good enough just to have a number. It has to be identifiable on the rolling stock. And we'll come to that very quickly. In 2023, we had another step forward in the way that the protocol operates, because the UN Economic Commission for Europe adopted for the first time a set of model rules as to how you permanently mark the railway equipment. Now, it's very easy to say, well, the rolling stock has to be marked, but how? What size? What is it on a plate? Is it a GPS chip? What color is the plate? We also had to deal with the fact that you have to be clear on what actually constituted an item of railway rolling stock. Not as easy as you think. Articulated rolling stock, is that one item or two items? What about TGV or ICE equipment? Is that a train set and therefore one item, or is it a combination of items? So we've had to grapple with all of those problems, and those have been dealt with in the UN model rules. These are voluntary rules. It's not imposed on anyone. However, what we would expect is that on any financing going forward, financiers will insist on the debtor or keeper complying with those rules, because that's the only way you can be sure that the unique numbering system works. You need the unique number to be able to establish your rights, but you have to associate that unique number with the rolling stock. Otherwise, you can't identify the rolling stock, which relates to the rights. So you'll see there that the UN issued the rules in 2023. In fact, they've already been through one revision. The booklet's not yet available, but will be available soon. And it's revised to create a transition period for used equipment. There's also a set of guidance notes that were issued at the same time. And the rules themselves are constructed in such a way that they can be revised on a regular basis, so that we can take into account technological developments as they occur. So it's a global voluntary minimum standard, and it imposes responsibilities on the keeper to permanently maintain on the rolling stock the URVIS number, the Unique Rail Vehicle Identification System number. The keepers of the rolling stock will need to undertake to abide by these rules. They're not always the contracting parties, and that's one of the tricky things we had to face in drafting these rules. So what will happen is that we will require the parties actually in physical possession of the rolling stock to register at the International Registry and undertaking that they will abide by these rules, and that will be part of the security that the creditor will need to have to ensure that the rolling stock is correctly identified. And almost certainly compliance with the model rules would be a precondition for the financing, but in any event, it will be a precondition as a precondition for the registration of the international interest. And as I mentioned before, there are some transitional rules relating to rolling stock already in use. It will be very simple. It doesn't need to be anything more than that. These are the minimum standards. You can do more. It could be bigger. It could be It could be including other information as well. But at the very minimum, that's what all of this number should look like on a plate on both sides of the railway rolling stock. So what does this all bring us? We know that there are massive needs for the expansion of the rail system across the world. Just to give you one example, the UN Economic Commission for Africa published a report a few months ago, which stated that to implement the African Continental Free Trade Area, they reckon you need investment of at least 170,000 new freight wagons by 2030. Now, if we have manufacturers in the room, I think you'll all say good luck with that, because manufacturing 170,000 wagons is not an easy thing to do. But even half of that would be an enormous achievement for the African economy. But the trouble is there's no money. And until you have a system which can actually bring in the private sector to be able to finance the way that rolling stock is procured, then in fact the procurements won't happen. So the Luxembourg Rail Protocol in many countries will be the key to unlock the way that you can actually procure new rolling stock and develop the rail system. And we certainly need that. We know that railways are an essential part of a sustainable development agenda. We know that the roads in many countries, not just in Africa, are crumbling because of the incessant use of lorries, destroying the roads, poisoning citizens in cities with pollution, killing many people on the roads because of the high level of accidents, certainly compared to rail transport. And railways are fundamentally more efficient. If you carry freight by train, you can carry maybe 100 containers, where each of those containers would have to be carried by a separate truck and a separate truck driver. So the private sector, if it can provide the finance for that system, can bring more private capital into the rail sector through the Luxembourg Rail Protocol, then we're going to make an enormous step forward for the railway industry and for society as a whole. And it's also important to bear in mind that the governments have limited facilities. They have limited finance. Maybe the Qataris are not short of 2 pennies at the moment, and maybe there are a couple of other governments who have every item covered and financed. But for the vast majority of countries around the world, governments have to limit the amount that they spend on schools, on hospitals, on defence, on transport. And so if that is limited, then what you want governments to do is to use the money as effectively as possible. And what we say to governments is that just because you build the roads, it doesn't mean that you should be financing every car that runs along the roads. So why should you be financing every item of rolling stock that's running on railways, even if you spend most of your money building the railways? The private sector can come in and take that burden, as long as it has the legal infrastructure to do so, which is why the Luxembourg Protocol is so important. And then we have the new technology that's coming. Some of it is with us, a lot of it is coming, which will need financing, whether it's hydrogen fuel cell locomotives, revising existing diesel locomotives to make them a lot more efficient. Artificial intelligence is going to profoundly change the way that the rail industry works. Variable gauge rolling stock, something that's familiar here in Spain. I think it's got an amazing future, and we're beginning to see it happen. For example, in Switzerland, there's a passenger line that's now working with variable gauge rolling stock. There's a new line that's going to be operated with equipment provided also from Switzerland in Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey, which will shift gauge as it goes into the new system. The Ukrainians are now playing with the idea of variable gauge rolling stock for obvious reasons, because Ukraine is on the 1520 Russian gauge. It's going to get all of its material, all of its rebuilding materials from the West, and that's coming in on a different rail system, a different rail gauge. And that means that they will need to accommodate that. But that's going to need massive investment. DAC, digital automatic coupling, is a very important part of the freight industry. and the way that it's going to develop in the future. The latest estimates are that it's going to cost the industry about 11 billion euros. How's that going to be financed? It will deliver efficiency. It will be an important part of the development of the industry, but it still needs cash on the table. And then there are loads of other little ideas that are developing, including convoying, driverless trains, supercapacitor trams, new technology for running urban transport systems, quieter wagons. So all of this needs investment. If you provide the structure for the private sector to come in and provide that investment in a secure way, then we're confident that this will happen. And that's why the protocol makes such a difference. So we can see that the protocol will make a difference both on a macro level and on a micro level. On a macro level, we talked a little bit about the health of the population, the fact that in places like Africa, you've got a vast move of population from the land to the towns. Not only do they need to be accommodated, but they have to be moved. And for people who've had to wait or work their way through traffic jams in places like Nairobi or Dar es Salaam or Lagos, it's clear that the growth of population in the cities is going to need a significant rethink as to how urban transport works, and that's going to need a massive amount of finance. But the macro benefits go beyond that. We know that the sustainability of the railways compared to road and aviation is significant. That has an enormous effect on us. We are now all involved and invested, I hope, in fighting against climate change. The railways are an enormous tool against climate change, and that has an enormous cost to society if we ignore that problem. On a micro level, it lowers the cost of finance. Why? How does it do that? Well, firstly, there's the obvious calculation. If you lower the risk for the financier, then you lower the cost, because there's a risk-reward ratio. Now, I know we have financiers in the room, and they will always say, well, you know, you have to negotiate. We're not going to give you money for nothing. But nonetheless, there is a relationship between the risk and the reward. And therefore, if you lower the risk, you should be able to lower the cost. And that's not just a factor of your friendly bankers saying, well, you know, I'm going to reduce the financing costs. It's also a factor of the way that the regulatory environment forces banks, for example, to allocate capital against their risks. The higher the risk, the more capital they have to allocate against it. That capital has a cost. And therefore, if they can reduce the risks, reduce the amount of capital, then they actually reduce the cost of finance. And therefore, that makes them able to reduce the cost that of credit they put out into the market. But the other thing is that much of the finance today of rolling stock is specialized finance. People who understand railways very well. But there's a vast pool of cash out there, particularly with the institutions, with the pension funds, with other long-term investors, private equity investors, who don't know anything about railways, who don't understand about railways, and are very worried about going into markets which look attractive, good long-term investments, but they don't understand the risks. If you have an international treaty which underwrites those risks, then you open the door for other types of capital to come into the market, which then increases supply and hopefully reduces the cost. Important also is that what we're doing here is not just introducing a new system in Spain or a new system in Sweden. What we're doing is introducing a common system, and that has a number of angles to it. It means that you can save money on documentation because you have the same rights, not depending on where the equipment is and where the debtor is. But it also means that you can move rolling stock more easily around within a geographical system, confident that your rights will still be respected, particularly when all of the countries, and that's not the case as of today, but particularly when all of the countries have adopted the Luxembourg Rail Protocol in a particular geographical region. And then the Orvis numbering system has given to us some amazing gifts, which I have to say we didn't understand at the beginning. So, for example, the ability to permanently track rolling stock throughout its lifetime opens up not just security for the creditor, in that the creditor can find out in real time where his asset is and knows how to repossess assets because he knows where they are, which is something most of the time he couldn't do in the past. But it also means that it opens up possibilities of, for example, predictive maintenance, where if you are able to gauge each asset by number and you can work out from the data how many kilometers it's traveled over the course of, let's say, the last 5 years, then you can decide when it is correct to do the maintenance, not just because, as it happens in Europe, generally there's a major overhaul of rolling stock every 6 years. In Africa, it's every 8 years, regardless of the utilization. So that predictive maintenance possibility opens up when you've got a unique number, which is a constant, where you can always collect data based on that particular number. And then there have been some very strange add-on benefits, which we didn't anticipate. So, for example, one of the problems with the rail system is damage track. And you can have a stretch of 500 kilometers. Rolling stock goes over a bit of damaged track. It comes back at the end of the journey, and you find that the wheel sets are damaged. And you don't know where that damage is. And up until now, people have just been physically inspecting 500 kilometers of track to try and work out when that damage is. Well, if you've got technology installed on the rolling stock, where you have a unique identifier, so you know which wagon went over which bit of track at any one time, you can identify through the vibrations over the damaged track to the nearest 50 meters where the damage is actually taking place. I mean, that's mind-blowing. We also think, and this is controversial, but we also think that export credits should be cheaper. Now, as far as aircraft are concerned, there is something called an aircraft sector understanding, which is agreed between I think it's 37 states that are under the auspices of the OECD, where they set certain minimum rates for the financing of various types of projects as part of an export finance program. And the rate, the premium that will be charged by the Export Credit Agency depends on various factors, including the credit rating of the buyer, of the person who is the risk, and the country risk. And the difficulty is that country risks in many countries that need rolling stock desperately, the country risk is very poor. So what the protocol does for the first time is open up the possibility of export credit agencies looking to the asset and not just looking to the user risk or the country risk. And that in itself has a value. But we have a precedent. The aircraft protocol has created a situation where export credit agencies discount their risk premiums by 10% when the equivalent protocol to the Cape Town Convention for aircraft applies. And so what we're saying to the export credit agencies is, my dear friends, bearing in mind that you wish to support environmentally sustainable projects, it would be an outrage if you didn't support rolling stock in the same way as you were supporting aircraft. And in fact, arguably, you should be supporting them more. So we would say, don't give a 10% discount, which is what you're giving on aircraft, but give a 20% discount. But at the very least, it has to be 10%. So this is pressure that is growing on the export credit agencies. And we're not asking for charity. They are qualitatively improving their risk position when the Luxembourg Rail Protocol applies. And on that basis, we think it's totally correct. And it would be hypocritical for them to deny this. It is totally correct for the export credit agencies to reflect that in the way that they price their risk premiums. So we do believe and we expect that to make a difference. And then there's a more sophisticated benefit of the protocol, which is the way that it supports operating leasing. If you look back at the aviation industry, over the last 40 years, it has blossomed. And one of the key factors for this has been operating leasing. The fact that you can have a company which doesn't have a huge net worth coming into the industry, operating entrepreneurially, operating leasing in the aircraft. And that's been a huge positive driver for the whole of the aviation industry. That's not happening to a great extent yet in the rail industry, particularly not in the passenger rail sector. And by underwriting operating leasing, because a lessor is fully supported by the Luxembourg Protocol, that will open up all sorts of interesting benefits. And in particular, it will open the way for slide there. Yeah, it will open up the way for creating a positive dynamic in the way that you price operating leases. So we all know that operating leases are priced by reference to the creditworthiness of the lessee, the prevailing interest rates that you have to apply, and the residual value of the equipment. So the higher the residual value, the lower the rent. That creates a positive dynamic towards more standardization of rolling stock, which in turn creates economies of scale for the manufacturing community, and therefore creates a much more dynamic and competitive industry, and seriously reduces costs for the industry. And by the way, earns more sales for the manufacturers. The Orvis benefits can be looked at separately as well. What Orvis does is to provide an adjunct to the current system of immatriculation. So we know that rolling stock, for example, to be admitted on the European rail system, has to be controlled. It has to be accepted onto the system. It has to have either a national vehicle number or eventually a European vehicle number on the side of the rolling stock. But that number is a different system, is part of a different system, fulfilling a different purpose. And the way to look at this is like your car. On your car, you have a number plate on the back of the car, front of the car, and you have what's called a VIN, a vehicle identification number, on the inside of the chassis. They're two different things. They're fulfilling two different purposes. And that's what the Orvis number is to the running number that's being operated on the European rail system. But by the way, only on the European rail system. So trams, metro trains, sealed rail systems like the Rettich-Bahn in Switzerland are not covered by the European regulations either. What it will also do, though, is to support regulatory cooperation and interoperability. Now, let me give you a couple of examples. In Africa, for example, there is no common system at the moment for regulating access of rolling stock onto a different rail system. There's not even a proper regulatory system, except perhaps in South Africa, definitely in South Africa. But otherwise, it's just the railway companies regulating themselves. So the difficulty is that if you want to bring in entrepreneurs, new actors into the business, you need to have a common system to be able to check that the rolling stock is available, that it can be used, and it can be used in a way that will not tear up the track. But to do that, you have to have a dossier. You have to be able to hand over the dossier to another regulator or even another operator. And you can only do that if you've got a common identification system. Many years ago, I talked to the head of the Zimbabwe Railway Company, and I asked him the question that his name was Mike. I said to him, Mike, if you buy a locomotive from South Africa and you bring it over to Zimbabwe and it comes over the bike bridge and it's got a number on the side of the wagon or the locomotive, what do you do? And he said, well, I paid out the number and I put another number on there. Well, okay, that's okay for his purposes, but as a creditor, you go crazy because suddenly your collateral is being seriously threatened. The Orvis number will be there as a permanent identifier. So regardless of what happens on the side of that locomotive, that plate will still be on the side of the locomotive, which will be the permanent identification, unique identification of rolling stock. And it will allow regulators then to actually identify the rolling stock that's moving across regional or international systems. And then also it's a defense against fraud, combined with the use of the international registry. If you have a locomotive with a random number on it, maybe unique, may not be, and you're financing it, how do you know it's not financed somewhere else as well? How do you know that somebody hasn't got a contract to buy it? You just don't know about it as a financier. On the other hand, if you're a purchaser of that locomotive, you won't necessarily know that somebody has a lien on that asset. So if you uniquely identify that asset and you register that interest in the international registry, that provides you with a serious constraint against either deliberate fraud or sometimes accidental fraud. In other words, that people mix up numbers, they don't realize that some of these wagons have already been financed or whatever. If you've got this combination of the unique vehicle number and the registration system, that will create a significant block to fraudulent use of the rolling stock. It's a one system applicable worldwide for all rail assets, so it's an efficient system. It should be a key element of AI and autonomous operation, and also for DAC. When governments or other intergovernmental agencies are financing digital automated coupling, they want to know that it's going for a particular item of rolling stock. They're not providing money for what they think are 3 assets, but in fact it's only 1. As I mentioned before, real-time tracking of the condition and location of assets, and it makes it a lot easier for lifetime asset management. So there are things you need to consider as we look forward. Obviously, we need to press governments to adopt the Luxembourg Rail Protocol. The fact that Spain has adopted this doesn't stop us going to France or Germany or Italy, all of whom have already signed the protocol, to tell them to move forward. Follow the example of Spain, is what we will say. But they do need to move forward, because the more integrated system you have, the more you have a common legal framework applying to the financing of rolling stock across Europe, the easier it will be. So we need to press governments to move ahead. Obtaining the Orvis number and marking the rolling stock as those numbers become available is going to be increasingly significant. We are pretty confident that a lot of operators, or at least a lot of, and certainly a lot of financiers, even on existing equipment, and we'll come back and visit that after the coffee break, but even on existing equipment, that there will be real benefit in actually taking the Orvis number, putting it on the side of the wagon or the locomotive, which will, in its own way, give a degree of security for the financier, even before the Luxembourg Protocol applies. And then there will be some positioning going on. So, for example, I spoke to one bank, who should be nameless, but I spoke to one bank and said, well, in your country, on the 8th of March, the Luxembourg Protocol won't be in force. So what are you going to do? How do you get the benefits? And he was very fast off the block. He said, absolutely, we'll be running financing through Luxembourg, because Luxembourg has adopted the protocol. It makes absolute sense to actually construct financing structures where at all possible, using the benefit of the protocol, because it does obviously create material and tangible benefits for the finance community. And then another area that we'll have to think about are the registering of what are called unilateral interests. There are 2 types of interests which are considered to be unilateral interests under the Luxembourg Protocol. In other words, that unlike the norm, where a creditor and the debtor both have to agree before registration can be made, there are certain circumstances where the creditor should not be dependent on the debtor agreeing. Now, there are 2 specific cases there. But one relates to pre-existing interests. If at the time the protocol comes into force, so in Spain on the 8th of March, there are existing financings out there, and under the declaration made by Spain, I won't bore you with the details, but it's under Article 60 of the Convention. What that means is that lessors and secured financiers have 3 years to register their pre-existing interests. If they don't register those interests at the International Registry, they lose priority against the subsequent registered international interests. Because the way that the registry works is that it's first to register who has priority. There is an interim period of 3 years where the existing priorities of the existing financings will be respected. And there is a system where the pre-existing interest can be registered to preserve that priority. But if you don't do it, then a subsequent financier coming along will take a higher priority under the protocol compared to the pre-existing interest. So that's something that needs to be addressed urgently. It needs to be looked at within a short period of time. The registration of pre-existing interest should be made, And then that secures the position of the existing financiers on financings that were set up before the protocol entered into force. And then the second area of unilateral interest is the registrable non-consensual right or interest. And in certain cases, and depends on the country, there will be declarations where governments will say, well, there are certain things that override the need for debtor consent. So, for example, you might have a default judgment against a debtor. Now you want to register your lien on his assets at the International Registry in Luxembourg. Now, he's not necessarily going to give you his consent. In fact, it's most unlikely he'll give you his consent. So you have to have the ability to act unilaterally to register that default judgment against those items of rolling stock at the International Registry to establish your prior position compared to any subsequent creditors. There may be other examples. The classic example is the workman's lien, where somebody has done maintenance work on an item of rolling stock under national law. He often has a lien on the asset to secure his payment of his fees, of his charges. And he would, in some cases, depending on the declaration, he would have the ability to register his lien against the rolling stock at the International Registry, regardless of whether the debtor agreed or not. That creates some interesting conundrums in terms of marking the rolling stock, because you still have to have the party that is in possession of the rolling stock actually putting the Orvis number on the side of the rolling stock. And that's something that we try to deal with carefully in the UN model rules. User registrations are going to be important. As Kathy will explain after coffee, the parties who will use the registry, who will actually have access to the registry, not to do searches, but to make registrations, to give consent to registrations, these people have to be authenticated. They have to pass certain tests to make sure they are who they say they are, that they are acting through people who have authority to act on behalf of particular companies. We'll need to think about debtor undertakings to abide by the model rules. Those will be filed with the International Registry. There's no cost, but it will be on the International Registry website. You'll be able to see who's actually undertaken to be bound by the rules. We'll need to think about contract clauses, and we'll discuss this a little bit after the coffee break. But in lease contracts, we'll need to start putting in provisions into those contracts. Firstly, when the contracts are entered into after 8th of March, we will need to put in provisions which regulate, firstly, the fact that the parties agree that they will have to register and cooperate to register the international interest that will be generated by the financing. But there may be other things that need to be covered, including, for example, that the debtor or the possessor, if it's not the same, has to agree to be bound by the UN model rules on marking the rolling stock. And then the interesting question will be, firstly, do you register your security interests at the International Registry once the protocol is operating? The answer should be yes, because if you don't do that, you potentially lose your rights against subsequent registering entities. The interesting question also, however, is what about lessors and financiers where the debtor is not in a contracting state? And what should you do then? Should you register anyway, or should you wait until the country becomes a contracting state? And the fact is that the registrar is not going to turn around to you and say, no, I won't accept your registration. If you put something on the registry, the registrar essentially will accept the registration as long as it complies with the terms and conditions of the International Registry. So in that case, there could be some real benefits as a matter of domestic law and also as a matter of prevention to put up your interests, even if, let's say, you're a Spanish lessor and a French lessee, and France has not yet ratified the protocol, because that will put up into the system the fact that you as a lessor have an interest in this asset, even though you don't get all the rights under the protocol because the debtor's not in a contracting state. Nonetheless, from a purely practical point of view, what we've seen happening in the aviation industry for sure will happen in the railway industry, which is that whenever there's a financing or a purchase of rolling stock in the future, the first thing that the lawyer will do, advising his client, is to say, we will inspect the register. just to make sure that there's no other claim on that asset. So this is a very effective way that financiers can protect their interests, even if the Luxembourg Protocol is not yet in force in that particular country. So to conclude, the Luxembourg Protocol is a new global treaty. It's breaking completely new ground in the rail sector, and it will create some material support for the creditor community, enabling the private sector to provide, we hope and we expect, more and cheaper finance for the rail sector, financing railway rolling stock. The security interests are registrable and can be registered in the international registry. The registry will govern not just the rights, but also the priority of the rights. First to register gets priority unless the parties agree otherwise. And this registration will be done through the internet 24/7. It introduces the Orvis numbering system, which is a completely new, global, unique, permanent numbering system for each item of railway equipment. And I hope, I suspect, that over the years, manufacturers will gradually just equip the rolling stock with Orvis numbers as they come off the production line. So they will be ready for financing rather than having to run around afterwards to try and put plates on the side of the wagons. And the Orvis identifiers, we know, will bring all sorts of additional benefits. So you have cheaper finance, simpler structures, more easily understandable documentation, lower risk, more finance, lower export premiums. What's the argument against? The protocol will underwrite secured private finance and operating leasing, so therefore it will lower the barriers to entry for parties coming into the industry, make it more competitive, more dynamic, and we think it will result in more sales, more business, more development of the rail sector for the benefit of the community as a whole. And it'll be in force, as you know, in 10 days' time. And the question is, are you ready? Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take a break. We're going to take a break for coffee. So we'll see you shortly around 6 o'clock.
I've seen this one here.
Oh, yes.
Good afternoon again. So we're back with the technical discussion on the Rail Luxembourg Protocol. We're going to start with Kathy Hillman-Weyer, representative from the Bunis, and we want to explain in detail and from a technical perspective how this international registry is going to become operative and what are the main features of this registry that we should all bear in mind in order to think about necessary implementations going forward in the Spanish system. Kathy, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Hola. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Jose Luis. I'm very pleased to join you today. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm getting an echo and a delayed audio, so I'm going to try to keep going.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
We hear you very well.
Okay, I'm going to take my sound down so I maybe don't get that echo. All right. So maybe just a moment of introduction. Yeah. Okay. It's about a 30-second delay at least. When I say something, it comes back to me. I'm not sure I'll be able to do this, so I'll give it a try, but I can't hear you if I turn my sound down. So I'll maybe speak and then pause for any comment. Just a bit of introduction, perhaps. I am a director of the company that is the registrar designate for the International Registry under the Luxembourg Rail Protocol. We are very pleased and delighted to be assuming this role. And like many who have spoken before me, we are extremely excited to be part of this transformational change in this industry. It's very aligned to the work of our parent company, ISC, and the registries that we operate globally. Personally, I also have taken great pride in this project and initiative. I spent the bulk of my career developing legislative frameworks and operating systems for a variety of types of registries. So this has been a really unique and exciting project for us, and we've been so pleased to work with Howard and the team at Unidroit, and are looking forward to extending our working relationship with all of you and the clients you serve and the industry you work in as the registry becomes incorporated into your new way of doing business. So without further ado, I have about 9 slides to get through. I will try to go through them quickly, and maybe because of that echo, I would usually welcome interjections or comments and questions along the way. Perhaps I'll try to make my way through the slide deck and then come back so I can hear you. So maybe Anna, if you could message if there's any issue with the sound. We're just watching for messages from you. Otherwise, I'll carry on. Okay, to the next slide. So I do want to just also preface that this is a very high-level flyover around the technical and functional characteristics of the International Registry. I certainly wouldn't suggest that this is a replacement for any training or orientation that we'll be offering to those who will be using the registry in the coming days and weeks. This is to just give you a bit of an introduction to some of the terminology and functioning of the registry, so that perhaps when you get a chance to look at the regulations and the user manual, that you'll have a bit of a leg up and some familiarity with the lexicon here. So just to reference the declarations around undertaking to be bound by the model rules have been referenced by Howard already. And so this is an important step for parties who will be interacting with the registry. The undertaking to be bound by the model rules and procedures for the permanent marking and identification of rolling stock is a critical step, and something that I think you'll want to be attentive to, and the information about those who have made that declaration will be available on the website as those declarations come to us. So it's a pretty basic process, including confirmation that the declaration may be made publicly available for all to see. So that's a key part of participation in the registry. As well, the regulatory framework for the registry, as you all know very well, starts with the convention and the protocol, and on coming into force of the protocol, there will be the regulations, procedures, and terms and conditions associated with the operation of the registry, and that will form the collection of materials that provide the governing framework for the registry. So I'm sure that you will all be looking forward to those and digesting those regulations, which have some familiarity and similarity to the aircraft regs and procedures for those of you who also work in that industry, although they have been customized and updated and for purpose for the rail registry. Okay, next slide. So as I said, this is not a complete orientation, but accessing the registry is the first thing that I think everyone will want to be familiar with. There is a user onboarding process, and the registry is premised on interactions with individuals or natural persons. And as Howard mentioned earlier, there will be authentication of individuals for many interactions with the registry, and multi-factor authentication for everyone coming in to work with the registry. The two terms I think that you would want to be familiar with are guest user and authorized user. Those are the two descriptions for individuals who will be coming to the door of the registry. As a guest user, that's the lowest level of access that's provided, or authentication and security screening. It provides very limited access to the registry. It includes the ability to search and to obtain the identifiers that will be allocated by the registrar. Minimal information is required, but there will be verification of email addresses and names associated with guest users. The next level of authentication or approval to interact with the registry would be as an authorized user, and it's a second level of approval following guest user approval. So you first become a guest user, and then you take the additional step of obtaining authorization as an authorized user, which includes approval by the registrar. This is also available to natural persons, and there will be a status of authorization provided by the registrar on an annual basis, and annual renewal of that status to ensure currency of information and continuing viability of that user will be part of the process. Next, when it comes to accessing the registry for purposes of registrations and transactions, the terms that I think you will want to be familiar with are authenticated entity, administrator, and designated representative. So on this very busy slide, those are the areas to focus on. Entities include all types of persons. So there's a very broad definition of person in the regulations, including natural persons and almost every type of entity. All persons, including natural persons, must become an authenticated entity to undertake registration activities. That requires review and approval by the registrar, and that initial submission is expected to come in by an authorized user, so an individual who has the authority to represent the entity in application for approval as an authenticated entity with the registry. There will also be the concurrent appointment of an administrator who we expect will be those key staff or members of entity organizations that will interact with the registry, and they will be required to be authorized users. So those individuals who will interact on behalf of an entity can be identified as administrators for all kinds of entities. If a natural person is wanting to interact with the registry, there's still a requirement to be established and set up as an authenticated entity, which includes a little higher level of information and approval process than just as an authorized user. As an authenticated entity, you can be named as a party in a registration. So every named party will be required to proceed through the authentication process. Preparation and submission of consent to registrations will come through authenticated entities or effectively their administrators. Authenticated entities can also be designated by a named party as a designated representative. So if, for example, a manufacturer or a financing company works with a law firm on a regular basis, that law firm might be identified as the designated representative for their transaction. So I think that's a quick overview. Designated representatives also must be authenticated entities and go through that same process. So everyone who transacts is an authenticated entity, primarily they act through their administrator, who's a natural person, and can designate another entity as their designated representative. Okay, IRVIS identifiers have been referenced by Howard. So this is the unique and very fundamental characteristic of how the International Registry will function. IRVIS identifiers are the foundation of all registrations and the foundation of all search activity. IRVIS identifiers will be issued and allocated by the registrar to persons on demand. So allocation of an IRVIS number by the registrar does not associate an IRVIS number with any item of rolling stock. IRVIS identifiers will be associated with items of rolling stock by the persons who obtain them from the registry. As you're all aware, the model rules govern IRVIS identifier use following allocation. Okay, submission of registrations. This is really, I would say, the bulk of the meat and potatoes of the registry and probably what you're most interested in, but would also be the focus of the orientation and training programs that we have in a state of readiness and that we'll be offering once the registry goes live. There are a number of features of the registry of which we're very proud, and I hope that you as users of the registry will find convenient and efficient for how you interact with the registry. We also are very keen to receive your feedback and learn from your experience and look to any improvements that you think would be useful in terms of how the registry works with your workflow and your transaction processing. There are a number of things around streamlining interactions with the registry. There are single submissions where you can provide a number of IRVIS numbers for which registrations would occur. You can look up other authenticated entities who would be a party to a transaction. So the intent has been to try to limit the amount of data entry that's required by those using the registry and to link to other information that has already been gathered and is stored in the registry and available to you. In the case of jurisdictions where an authorizing entry point code is required, as in Spain, that will be captured as part of the registration process. Consents, which Howard mentioned, are a key part of how the International Registry will function, will be facilitated through correspondence to name parties to transactions, as well as through a portal where designated representatives could also provide consent on behalf of the parties who they represent. Payment for all transactions in the registry will be by credit card. Okay. I think that's probably all I will say about that. As I mentioned, the authorizing entry point is a function of registrations associated with debtor parties who are located in Spain. That will be something that is important for you to take into account, and we will be corresponding and in touch with the registrar to ensure that there's good interaction and interface between the International Registry and what you're familiar with in your home jurisdiction. The registry will facilitate multiple registration types, which are contemplated by the regulatory framework of the International Registry. As Howard, I won't go through all of these, and I'm sure you'll enjoy reading through the regulations to understand many of which are familiar to you and similar to what you have experienced in the aircraft registry if you've worked with that registry. This also includes the unilateral interest that Howard mentioned and the unique processes associated in particular with the RNCRIs. Lastly, I'll take a moment to touch on search. Search is the fundamental function and output of the registry that really reinforces the value of the registry. Of course, the information that comes from registrations is most useful and critical for everyone to be able to obtain and the search process. There are two types of search: informational searches and the priority search. Informational searches are just that. They are to facilitate and provide information that will assist you in interacting with the registry. They don't provide information in which you would base any decisions necessarily with regard to financing. Priority search certificates are the sole authentic and informative source of priorities and the status of interests that have been registered. However, informational searches, of which there are 3, are available to help you make your way through the registration functions of the registry. There are tools to help you choose a nervous identifier that you might use for a search or registration. You can search by running number under the transitional rules of the model rules. As you may know, running number can be used as part of registrations for a transitional time in addition to the IRBIS number. And so if there's a desire to try to match or understand where there's been a registration against a nervous identifier that is associated with a running number, there will be a search function available to assist you with that. If you're looking for an authenticated entity to include as a registration or to identify as a designated representative, there will be a search available to see and understand if that entity has completed the authentication process with the registrar and to confirm that that status is current and active. There is also an ability for what we're calling a self-search for any named party to conduct a search of the registry to learn and understand what registrations exist by IRBIS identifier in which that named party is identified. So those are the informational searches. The priority search is conducted only by IRBIS identifier. So there's no name search to understand the status of priority of registrations in the registry. All registrations go back to the source of the IRBIS identifier and will be conducted on the basis of an IRBIS identifier. So the priority search certificate is the key outcome of that search process. It provides a comprehensive history of the registration activity for an item of railway rolling stock identified by the IRVIS identifier number. All searches will include information that is date and time stamped. The registry will function in coordinated universal time, and those search certificates will be provided electronically and delivered on demand. So that is a high-level flyby. I'm going to turn my audio back on, and hopefully I can hear questions.
Good afternoon again. So we're back with the technical discussion on the Rail Luxembourg Protocol. We're going to start with Kathy Hillman-Weyer, representative from the Goonies, and we want to explain in detail and from a technical perspective how this international registry is going to become operative and what are the main features of this registry that we should all bear in mind in order to think about necessary implementations going forward in the Spanish system. Kathy, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Hola. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Jose Luis. I'm very pleased to join you today. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm getting an echo and a delayed audio, so I'm going to try to keep going.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
We hear you very well.
Okay, I'm going to take my sound down so I maybe don't get that echo. All right. So maybe just a moment of introduction. Yeah. Okay. It's about a 30-second delay at least. When I say something, it comes back to me. I'm not sure I'll be able to do this, so I'll give it a try, but I can't hear you if I turn my sound down. So I'll maybe speak and then pause for any comment. Just a bit of introduction, perhaps. I am a director of the company that is the registrar designate for the International Registry under the Luxembourg Rail Protocol. We are very pleased and delighted to be assuming this role, and like many who have spoken before me, we are extremely excited to be part of this transformational change in this industry. It's very aligned to the work of our parent company, ISC, and the registries that we operate globally. Personally, I also have taken great pride in this project and initiative. I spent the bulk of my career developing legislative frameworks and operating systems for a variety of types of registries. So this has been a really unique and exciting project for us, and we've been so pleased to work with Howard and the team at Unidroit, and are looking forward to extending our working relationship with all of you and the clients you serve and the industry you work in as the registry becomes incorporated into your new way of doing business. So without further ado, I have about 9 slides to get through. I will try to go through them quickly, and maybe because of that echo, I would usually welcome interjections or comments and questions along the way. Perhaps I'll try to make my way through the slide deck and then come back so I can hear you. So maybe Anna, if you could message if there's any issue with the sound. We're just watching for messages from you. Otherwise, I'll carry on. Okay, to the next slide. So I do want to just also preface that this is a very high-level flyover around the technical and functional characteristics of the International Registry, I certainly wouldn't suggest that this is a replacement for any training or orientation that we'll be offering to those who will be using the registry in the coming days and weeks. This is to just give you a bit of an introduction to some of the terminology and functioning of the registry, so that perhaps when you get a chance to look at the regulations and the user manual, that you'll have a bit of a leg up and some familiarity with the lexicon here. So just to reference the declarations around undertaking to be bound by the model rules have been referenced by Howard already. And so this is an important step for parties who will be interacting with the registry. The undertaking to be bound by the model rules and procedures for the permanent marking and identification of rolling stock is a critical step, and something that I think you'll want to be attentive to. And the information about those who have made that declaration will be available on the website as those declarations come to us. So it's a pretty basic process, including confirmation that the declaration may be made publicly available for all to see. So that's a key part of participation in the registry. As well, the regulatory framework for the registry, as you all know very well, starts with the convention and the protocol, and on coming into force of the protocol, there will be the regulations, procedures, and terms and conditions associated with the operation of the registry, and that will form the collection of materials that provide the governing framework for the registry. So I'm sure that you will all be looking forward to those and digesting those regulations, which have some familiarity and similarity to the aircraft regs and procedures for those of you who also work in that industry, although they have been customized and updated and for purpose for the rail registry. Okay, next slide. So, as I said, this is not a complete orientation, but accessing the registry is the first thing that I think everyone will want to be familiar with. There is a user onboarding process, and the registry is premised on interactions with individuals or natural persons. And as Howard mentioned earlier, there will be authentication of individuals for many interactions with the registry, and multi-factor authentication for everyone coming in to work with the registry. The two terms I think that you would want to be familiar with are guest user and authorized user. Those are the two descriptions for individuals who will be coming to the door of the registry. As a guest user, that's the lowest level of access that's provided, or authentication and security screening. It provides very limited access to the registry. It includes the ability to search and to obtain the identifiers that will be allocated by the registrar. Minimal information is required, but there will be verification of email addresses and names associated with guest users. The next level of authentication or approval to interact with the registry would be as an authorized user, and it's a second level of approval following guest user approval. So you first become a guest user, and then you take the additional step of obtaining authorization as an authorized user, which includes approval by the registrar. This is also available to natural persons, and there will be a status of authorization provided by the registrar on an annual basis, and annual renewal of that status to ensure currency of information and continuing viability of that user be part of the process. Next, when it comes to accessing the registry for purposes of registrations and transactions, the terms that I think you will want to be familiar with are authenticated entity, administrator, and designated representative. So on this very busy slide, those are the areas to focus on. Entities include all types of persons. So there's a very broad definition of person in the regulations, including natural persons and almost every type of entity. All persons, including natural persons, must become an authenticated entity to undertake registration activities. That requires review and approval by the registrar, and that initial submission is expected to come in by an authorized user, so an individual who has the authority to represent the entity in an application for approval as an authenticated entity with the registry. There will also be the concurrent appointment of an administrator who we expect will be those key staff or members of entity organizations that will interact with the registry, and they will be required to be authorized users. So those individuals who will interact on behalf of an entity can be identified as administrators for all kinds of entities. If a natural person is wanting to interact with the registry, there's still a requirement to be established and set up as an authenticated entity, which includes a little higher level of information and approval process than just as an authorized user. As an authenticated entity, you can be named as a party in a registration. So every named party will be required to proceed through the authentication process. Preparation and submission of consent to registrations will come through authenticated entities or effectively their administrators. Authenticated entities can also be designated by a named party as a designated representative. So if, for example, a manufacturer or a financing company works with a law firm on a regular basis, that law firm might be identified as the designated representative for that transaction. So I think that's a quick overview. Designated representatives also must be authenticated entities and go through that same process. So everyone who transacts is an authenticated entity, primarily they act through their administrator, who's a natural person, and can designate another entity as their designated representative. Okay, IRVIS identifiers have been referenced by Howard. So this is the unique and very fundamental characteristic of how the international registry will function. IRVIS identifiers are the foundation of all registrations and the foundation of all search activity. IRVIS identifiers will be issued and allocated by the registrar to persons on demand. So allocation of an IRVIS number by the registrar does not associate an IRVIS number with any item of rolling stock. IRVIS identifiers will be associated with items of rolling stock by the persons who obtain them from the registry. As you're all aware, the model rules govern IRVIS identifier use following allocation. Okay, submission of registrations. This is really, I would say, the bulk of the meat and potatoes of the registry and probably what you're most interested in, but would also be the focus of the orientation and training programs that we have in a state of readiness and that we'll be offering once the registry goes live. There are a number of features of the registry of which we're very proud, and I hope that you as users of the registry will find convenient and efficient for how you interact with the registry. We also are very keen to receive your feedback and learn from your experience and look to any improvements that you think would be useful in terms of how the registry works with your workflow and your transaction processing. There are a number of things around streamlining interactions with the registry. There are single submissions where you can provide a number of IRVIS numbers for which registrations would occur. You can look up other authenticated entities who would be a party to a transaction. So the intent has been to try to limit the amount of data entry that's required by those using the registry and to link to other information that has already been gathered and is stored in the registry and available to you. In the case of jurisdictions where an authorizing entry point code is required, as in Spain, that will be captured as part of the registration process. Consents, which Howard mentioned, are a key part of how the International Registry will function, will be facilitated through correspondence to name parties to transactions, as well as through a portal where designated representatives could also provide consent on behalf of the parties who they represent. Payment for all transactions in the registry will be by credit card. Okay, I think that's probably all I will say about that. As I mentioned, the authorizing entry point is a function of registrations associated with debtor parties who are located in Spain. So that will be something that is important for you to take into account, and we will be corresponding and in touch with the registrar to ensure that there's good interaction and interface between the International Registry and what you're familiar with in your home jurisdiction. The registry will facilitate multiple registration types, which are contemplated by the regulatory framework of the International Registry. As Howard, I won't go through all of these, and I'm sure you'll enjoy reading through the regulations to understand many of which are familiar to you and similar to what you have experienced in the aircraft registry if you've worked with that registry. This also includes the unilateral interest that Howard mentioned and the unique processes associated in particular with the RNCRIs. Lastly, I'll take a moment to touch on search. Search is the fundamental function and output of the registry that really reinforces the value of the registry. Of course, the information that comes from registrations is most useful and critical for everyone to be able to obtain and the search process. There are two types of search: informational searches and the priority search. Informational searches are just that. They are to facilitate and provide information that will assist you in interacting with the registry. They don't provide information in which you would base any decisions necessarily with regard to financing. Priority search certificates are the sole authentic and informative source of priorities and the status of interests that have been registered. However, informational searches, of which there are 3, are available to help you make your way through the registration functions of the registry. There are tools to help you choose an herbicide identifier that you might use for a search or registration. You can search by running number under the transitional rules of the model rules. As you may know, running number can be used as part of registrations for a transitional time, in addition to the herbis number. And so if there's a desire to try to match or understand where there's been a registration against an herbis identifier that is associated with a running number, there will be a search function available to assist you with that. If you're looking for an authenticated entity to include as a registration or to identify as a designated representative, there will be a search available to see and understand if that entity has completed the authentication process with the registrar and to confirm that that status is current and active. There is also an ability for what we're calling a self-search for any named party to conduct a search of the registry to learn and understand what registrations exist by herbis identifier in which that named party is identified. So those are the informational searches. The priority search is conducted only by herbis identifier. So there's no name search to understand the status of priority of registrations in the registry. All registrations go back to the source of the herbis identifier, and will be conducted on the basis of a Nervous identifier. So the priority search certificate is the key outcome of that search process. It provides a comprehensive history of the registration activity for an item of railway rolling stock identified by the IRGUS identifier number. All searches will include information that is date and time stamped. The registry will function in coordinated universal time, and those search certificates will be provided electronically and delivered on demand. So that is a high-level flyby. I'm going to turn my audio back on, and hopefully I can hear questions.
No, it's very practical. Hi, thank you very much. It's Alfredo Cabellos from Watson Farley Williams. Two very practical questions. One, can we start the process of becoming an authorized user before the 8th of March? And who do we talk to? My experience with the aircraft registry has been it is very simple, at least in theory, but then we end up always talking with someone. So would that be you? Sorry, you're on mute. But those are my very practical questions.
No, I think she's coming. Sí, creo que no nos escucha a partir de las consolas.
Did Kathy hear us?
No, I don't think so.
Did you hear us, Kathy? No. Okay. I'll try and answer the question for you. I'll do my best. The registry doesn't open for business until the 8th of March. Because, and the reason for that is because the, I guess this might fix that, right? So I'm conscious of the fact that there may be people listening in. The reason for that is because the operation of the international registry is authorized by the regulations which were adopted by the supervisory authority. And the supervisory authority only comes into existence on the 8th of March. So what happens is on the 8th of March, it issues the regulations. It does a load of other things as well, including constitutes itself, and it issues the fee schedule and so on. And it approves also the procedures for the operational elements of the way that the registry works. So until that happens, the registry it may be able to function, but the regulations are actually not in force. So I would be astonished if the answer was anything other than you have to knock on the door basically on the 8th of March. Having said that, I think one advantage you have is that you know how this is going to work, and there's going to be quite a few people who have to learn still. So if you move quickly, you'll probably be at the head of the queue, and then get through the authentication system. But it is a serious problem because you can't afford to allow people to come in and place registrations on the registry unless they are fully authenticated. Otherwise, you corrupt the registry, and that would be a disaster. So there has to be that authentication system. But once it's done, then I think you'll find it's very straightforward.
No, we are, as a firm, we indeed are already in the aircraft.
Your professional user institute, yes. So am I. Yes, I know how it works. But by the way, one big difference you'll notice between the aircraft registry and the rail registry is that on the aircraft registry, I think I'm still right in saying that it's the computer that gets authorized. So you have to do everything through an individual computer. And I can tell you, I've had to bring in sort of people in my office at 10 o'clock at night to do a closing because you could only do it through that individual computer. Whereas with the rail registry, it'll be totally independent of computers. You'll be able to authorize through your iPhone or whatever. So it'll be completely independent.
We've been there and we ended up having computers, as you say, in Asia, one in Asia, one in Middle East, in Europe, so that at all times we could do those registrations.
Yeah, but sorry to say, that's 2004 technology. We've moved on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question, and you mentioned, maybe this is more for you, Howard, in your presentation, the role of other participants. So you're a lessor, you're a lessee, but also there's the keeper, right, who is in the possession really of the rolling stock. And so as lessee, not only the lessee will have to become a user, but also the keeper will have to become a user. Is that how it works?
No. But thank you firstly for pointing out that, and this is something that people don't always understand, that in fact you can have a number of players at the party, and not just a lessor and a lessee. And in the classic situation, you may have a lessor leasing rolling stock to a lessee. He then goes to a bank and discounts receivables and pledges the asset as security for the receivable, the financing. The bank may go out and syndicate that position, put it into a single purpose company, etc. You could easily have in one transaction a whole range of different international interests arising. And the key to the way that the international registry works is that prima facie it's supposed to register. So whoever puts their registration up on the registry first has priority against all the other secure parties. But there's a specific provision within the protocol, actually within the convention, which allows interested parties, to agree amongst themselves who has the priority. So you have a subordination agreement, and you'll see both in the protocol itself and in the regulations specific provision for changing the priorities, so that parties can agree who has number one position, who has number two, who has number three. All of that said, then to answer your question, in fact, the keeper, his job is to make sure that the rolling stock is marked with the Orbis number. Because what was clear from Kathy's presentation, at least I hope it was clear, is that you can only register against the Orbis number. You cannot register an international interest against a rolling number. You must do it against the Orbis number, and the search can only be against the Orbis number. And that's not worth anything unless it's actually marked on the rolling stock. Because only then can you say, okay, that's my interest, and there's the physical rolling stock. So the responsibility of the keeper, if he's not the debtor himself, is to make sure that the rolling stock is marked. And so he has to make an undertaking. He will have to give an undertaking, which is lodged at the international registry, which you will be able to inspect on the website to make sure he's made that undertaking. So if you're advising a lessor, leasing rolling stock to a lessee, and it's actually in the possession of the keeper, a third party, then in your contract, I hope, there will be a provision which says, dear debtor, we won't close this transaction until you ensure that the keeper has filed his undertaking with the international registry to confirm that he will be bound by the model rules. Okay, but he doesn't need to register as an authenticated entity, but he does have to register his compliance with the UN model rules to guarantee that the Orbis number will be marked on the road.
So the keeper only once filed the undertaking for any subsequent? No. So it's only once, or it's per particular?
No, only once.
Only once.
It's by company. Yeah.
So you do not have an assurance that is posted or fixed in a particular case. It's only an undertaking to comply with the model rules, right?
It's an undertaking to comply with the model rules until it's revoked, and that party always has the right to revoke it. But the revocation is only effective 3 months after the notice of revocation is published on the international registry website. The other thing, just to clarify very quickly, while we're on this subject, is the running number. Now, maybe you all know what a running number is, but perhaps I better explain that just in case you don't. The running number is a general term that's used for the immatriculation number that's used to admit particular types of rolling stock to service. So within the European rail network, you'll see on the side of Spanish rolling stock, for example, you'll see a 12-digit number. And it's actually 11 digits plus a check digit. And that is allocated either by the National Vehicle Registry that has accepted the rolling stock to enter into service, or and probably increasingly by the European Railways Agency, the ERA, which is based in Valenciennes, and it then allocates a European vehicle number. And gradually, we're moving towards a system where the European vehicle number is allocated. So that 12-digit number will be on the side of the rolling stock already. Okay? However, I'm going to ask the question for you. Why don't we use that as the unique identifier? It doesn't work, and let me explain to you why. Firstly, these numbers are different all over the world. So what may be operating in Europe does not operate in other parts of the world. Secondly, the number only is allocated for certain types of rolling stock. So, for example, the ERA has no competence to issue running numbers for trams or for metro trains, okay, which are all covered by the Luxembourg Rail Protocol. Moreover, the number can change because the running number is a constructed number. So there are bits in that number which tell you what the equipment is, who the keeper is, where the country, where the keeper is located, etc. And people can read that number to give them information. Whereas all this number is totally unconstructed, which means it's a random number. So what if the technical specifications of rolling stock with that 12-digit number change, then it's not an optional. It's not an optional thing to do. It's mandatory that the running number has to change to reflect the change of the technical specification. So of course that's a disaster for a creditor. I mean, suddenly he thought he had a number and suddenly it's gone. And then of course rolling stock can move out of the EU and move back in again, and then it gets another number. So that running number is useful. It's there. It's totally complementary to the August number, but it's useful. Its purpose is specifically to denote the acceptance of the rolling stock to operate on the rail system, that it's passed a set of criteria to operate on the rail system. It has nothing to do with finance or with the security, nor could it be, because it is changeable and it's not universal. All of that said, what we're doing on the registry is to create an optional field where you can still register the running number if you want to. Now, in certain cases, it's mandatory. So under the UN model rules of marking rolling stock, the problem we had to face was that if you've got rolling stock already in service, you can't suddenly run around, within 24 hours and mark all the rolling stock. It's just not physically possible. So you've got to give people time to do that. And so we said that as long as the running number is then registered, so then it becomes mandatory, we give you 12 months to put the August number on the side of the rolling stock. And then you would search initially by the running number, which is associated with the August number in the registry. But after those 12 months, the August number has to be on the side of the wagon or the locomotive. But what you can do is an informational search against the running number, which will then give you, hopefully one, but it could be more than one, August numbers, which have been associated over the years with that particular running number. Yep. Okay. Have I confused everybody? Hopefully not.
I think now it would be Benjamin explaining some aspects of cross-border issues.
Happy to go ahead, and I would like to first of all touch upon one issue, however, that you mentioned before. You basically only sort of linked it as an aside. The decisive element is where is the data located. That brings the system into life, and it's only the data situation. So, talking about cross-border, essentially we could also have a situation where we have everything within one state, the data in one state, all the other creditors and the rolling stock in one state. We don't really need a cross-border scenario for Cape Town to apply, just to put that into perspective. Obviously, typically, the rolling stock will be crossing borders. The the parties will be cross-border. I think with syndication, where there will be international banks involved. So in most of the cases, we will have an international scenario, but it need not be the case. Now, if we sort of look at the international scenario, we have problems both from a technical perspective and from a legal perspective. Traditionally, rolling stock markets have been very national. Think about the standard gauge versus the narrow gauge, for instance, in Spain. So it's been quite an issue to move rolling stock from one jurisdiction to another, which obviously in a creditor enforcement scenario raises issues. We quickly want to repossess the assets, and we quickly want to move the assets to another jurisdiction. All of that has been quite difficult. And obviously from a technical perspective, the European Union has done quite a lot when it comes, for instance, to the single European market, where homologation and technical harmonization are key elements. That's sort of the technical perspective. Then you have the legal perspective. Obviously, once the new system goes live, we will have new legal issues arising. I think of, for instance, Spanish creditor trying to enforce its rights in a jurisdiction that has not signed up to the Luxembourg Protocol yet. That will create new issues. For me in Germany, for instance, my home country, it's quite likely that the Spanish international interests would be recognized under German law, because we are quite open towards recognition of security interests. But definitely we will not be we definitely will not be attributing the full suite of Cape Town Luxembourg Rail Protocol and remedies to that interest. So there will be quite intricate situations, countries not recognizing the interest at all, others perhaps, but they're not allocating the entire suite of rights and to the respective international interests. So that will, over time, have to play out, and we will be looking to these new issues. Obviously, as Ed speaking, will arrive at the common market, however, that you talked about, sort of regions signing up. You know, Italy, you mentioned Germany, France, Spain. So once you have that market and all jurisdictions having signed up to the instrument, then things become easier again. But that will take time. Obviously, we would like to see many jurisdictions move quickly. I'm actually quite saddened that Germany is not among the early goers, the early runners here. You have the system. We're only looking towards Spain now to see how it plays out. I'm sure it's going to play out very well. I'd love to have the system in Germany. So we will obviously now move our ministry and we'll report to Spain and show all the benefits that come with this new regime. And hopefully Germany then will be one of the states that perhaps in 2 or 3 years the latest signs up, and then we get this common market of Cape Town interests, Luxembourg interests, that will make things easier. In the interim, there will be new issues. I think quite interesting issues for the lawyers to look into. But over time, we should really, as Howard pointed out, make things much simpler in terms of structures and documentation. Obviously, something a lawyer does not want to hear, because it means less work ultimately. But I guess that's what we're all signing up to. And we've all been working on this instrument for quite some time now. I've been around for about 15 years, I think. It's our passion topic, and we would really want to see this play out and really make things easier for the rolling stock community.
Can I just sort of test you a little bit on the cross-border aspect? A couple of things. Firstly, if a Spanish court makes an order for repossession of rolling stock, would that be enforced by a German court?
It would definitely. I think so, yes.
So Brussels 1 would apply?
Yes, that would be my view. Yes.
Yeah. So that's very significant, because what that means is that if you have a court order, even if only some of the EU states are parties, are contracting states, nonetheless, the effect of a court order from a court of a contracting state could have a direct impact on another EU state which is not yet the contracting state. Right?
I would take that view. There will be many of these kind of issues we will be looking into. I mean, you mentioned the international registry as a means of sort of notifying the world of interests that have been created. Even if you haven't signed up to the regime, I'll take the German example again, there will be something registered in the registry. So under sort of our title rules and bona fide purchase of rolling stock, we will be looking into the question of, was the purchaser who says he took clean title, was he actually in good faith? could he still be in good faith if the international interest or the title, the sale was actually registered, and he could have seen in the registry, even though he hadn't signed, his country had not signed up to the regime so far. It would have been possible. We just seeing Kathy showed us. He could have looked into the registry, and I would say over time it would become common and expected standard to look towards the registry to see is there something registered, to search it, even though you have not signed up. If you do not do that, then you're breaching the standard of care, and that under German law, for instance, would mean you cannot argue good faith acquisition of title, and therefore the legal position would be protected, although Germany had not signed up to the regime. So there will be interesting national laws, domestic law issue in this case. But the same will apply in many other jurisdictions. It's not like a German problem, bona fide good faith acquisition. That's something many jurisdictions will look into, even though they have not made the system applicable so far.
Okay, so there's an even more interesting example than in Germany, which is in Switzerland. Because in Switzerland, under Swiss law, you cannot pledge an asset without handing it over. If you don't hand it over to the pledgee, it's not an effective pledge. Well, that's no good. If you're a rail operator, the last thing you want to do is to hand the rolling stock over to the bank. And in fact, the bank doesn't want it anyway. He wants you to use it. And that's a real problem, because to create a watertight security under Swiss law is problematic. And at the moment, the practitioners are either just looking to the credit of the borrower, which may be, let's say, Swiss Railways, so maybe you don't care, or they are coming up with constructions where you have single-purpose companies that act as a pledge holder on behalf of the pledgee, but nonetheless they make it available to the pledgor, which is all rather artificial, and nobody really knows whether it works. Now, then you ask the question, well, how do they deal with aircraft finance in Switzerland? Okay, because there's plenty of aircraft that are leased to Swiss and other operators in Switzerland. And the answer is really interesting, because there's one exception to that rule. And the exception to the rule is that if your security interest is on a public register, then you don't need to hand over possession of the asset. So aircraft is not a problem. In fact, even more ironically, which annoys us, I'm afraid, and we keep on having a go at the Swiss government about this, there was once upon a time a very obscure registry for rolling stock in Switzerland. It was performing a different purpose. And the government, back in the late 90s, to save money, they decided to abolish it. It wasn't necessary. It's hardly doing anything. And they said, don't worry, the Luxembourg Rail Protocol is coming. And therefore, you'll be able to register your interests at the international registry. So we don't need this local registry anymore. And we always quote this back to the Swiss government to say, and so why aren't you ratifying the Luxembourg Rail Protocol? But nonetheless, it's a very good example of where there is a domestic law impact of this international treaty, which actually goes beyond the strict interpretation, if you like, of the protocol itself. There's a lot of knock-on effects, which are all positive, because at the end of the day, we know what's going to happen because we've seen it happen in the aviation world. At the end of the day, people like Benjamin and I and Jose Luis, we're advising clients, and the first thing we will do before any financing, before any purchase of rolling stock, is that we will check the registry. And as a matter of practice, that will create a whole layer of protection because everybody will know it. And therefore, people claiming an interest in rolling stock will register, regardless of whether the protocol is actually in force at the time where in the state where the debtor is located. Because this will become, just like in the aviation world, just it's instinctive. You just do it automatically.
May I add? Do you think that there is a different scenario when we have already an enforcement order issued by the Spanish court? We want to be recognized by the German court. That is a situation that we can solve with recognition of foreign order. But that is, in those cases, the German court should not dive into the substantial aspect behind, right? So it's completely relevant or should be relevant whether this particular international interest has been created, according to the German law. If we want to enforce, because we need an order by the German court, that is the situation where we could be in a disparity of national, in this case, national law and the Hampton Convention. Do you agree with that distinction, right?
Yeah, but you've got Brussels 1. So I mean the Brussels regulation will allow you to enforce that judgment, as I see it, without having to relitigate in Germany. And bearing in mind that we're dealing with rolling stock, in many cases, let's say freight rolling stock could be anywhere around Europe. I mean, I know Spain has a specific gauge, but nonetheless, rolling stock could be anywhere around Europe within the Western Central European gauge system. And on that basis, the ability to go to a local court and enforce the court order is extremely powerful. And it's a very powerful interim solution until we get all the states to adopt the protocol.
I'm a bit concerned with the time.
Yes.
If you agree, I think we could discuss a bit about the Spanish items that we were, and then come back to close the technical panel with the other points we discussed. So you would like Teresa to lead the conversation on the Spanish legal topics, starting by the Spanish entry point.
Absolutely.
Shall we
change to Spanish? Or
yes, please. Let's do that.
So, claro, para tratar con los aspectos que plantea el protocolo en España, tenemos que ver en particular cuáles son las declaraciones que España hizo en el protocolo ferroviario en relación naturalmente con las que previamente ha hecho con respecto al convenio. Y desde luego hay declaraciones interesantes, pero hay una de ellas que es absolutamente fundamental, que es en línea con lo que España hizo para el protocolo aeronáutico, ha designado igualmente un punto de acceso nacional. Y aquí hay varias cuestiones que puede ser interesante que discutamos. En primer lugar, una de las peculiaridades de la declaración española es que está desarrollada, redactada de un modo tal que habla de un punto de acceso autorizante. Y esto, como todos aquellos que tenéis ya experiencia en el sector aeronáutico, sabéis que fundamentalmente se articula con la emisión de un código de autorización que el registro de bienes muebles, en este caso, sin lugar a duda, por su competencia, es el registro central en Madrid, y que ahora podemos discutir, si queréis, en relación con el protocolo ferroviario, emite este código y es el código con el que se accede directamente por aquel que vaya a ser el que realice la inscripción al registro internacional. Este mismo modelo, prácticamente con similar redacción, es el que consta como declaración en el protocolo ferroviario. Esto quiere decir, en primer lugar, que todo apunta a que la estructura de la operación va a ser prácticamente idéntica, por tanto, solicitando un código de autorización y realizando, sin que esto pase por el registro de bienes muebles, realizando por parte del operador la inscripción con este código. Esto nos plantea varias cuestiones que hemos estado discutiendo en la audiencia hace unos minutos y que, por tanto, podría ser un momento interesante para abordarlas, ¿no? En primer lugar, si se va a mantener la centralidad del registro de bienes muebles de Madrid, también en relación con el protocolo ferroviario. Tened en cuenta, y lo sabéis muy bien, que el único punto de conexión relevante a los efectos del convenio y de los respectivos protocolos es la localización del deudor. Es naturalmente completamente irrelevante el domicilio de los fabricantes, la localización de los bienes en cualquier momento. Por tanto, este sería el elemento que vincula la transacción con España como Estado parte y, por tanto, la aplicación del convenio y del protocolo correspondiente. La cuestión está, habiendo un registro territorial, una estructura de distribución territorial, ¿esto tendría algún efecto en el domicilio del deudor en diferentes territorios a los efectos de solicitar un código? Hombre, hay dos razones fundamentales, en mi opinión, que apuntan a que no debería ser así. En primer lugar, el funcionamiento de esta emisión de código es prácticamente automatizado, se hace además por vía electrónica y requeriría, en nuestra opinión, un tratamiento lo más centralizado posible, si no totalmente centralizado, para que haya una posibilidad de trazabilidad de cuáles han sido los códigos emitidos. Por tanto, no parece que estaría justificado en absoluto una distribución territorial de potenciales registros emisores del código de autorización. Y si me permitís, José Luis, por añadir otro elemento más, me gustaría leeroslo en la declaración española, para que veáis que otra de las cuestiones que se plantearon es cuál es el factor de conexión y qué alcance tiene la solicitud de código, es decir, cuál es el alcance o la extensión que tiene la competencia en esta materia del punto de entrada, del punto de acceso nacional. ¿Y a qué me estoy refiriendo? Permitidme que os lea exactamente el texto de la declaración en la versión española, ¿vale? La declaración dice: el registro de bienes muebles será el punto de acceso autorizante por medio del cual se transmitirá al registro internacional, fijaos, autorizante por medio del cual se transmitirá. Hay aquí ya una redacción que nos complica entender si estamos ante un modelo autorizante o un modelo que se llama directo, ¿no? En el que el propio punto nacional se conecta de forma claramente electrónica y automática con el registro internacional. La información necesaria para la inscripción de las garantías internacionales sobre material rodante ferroviario. Hasta aquí bien. Y luego dice a continuación, así como los avisos de garantías nacionales, con excepción de las que tengan origen en leyes de otros estados. Esto fundamentalmente, a pesar de que la traducción al inglés, desafortunadamente, when I'm talking about the last point that you consider so confusing, in Spanish it's easier to understand, realmente lo que nos está diciendo es que, teniendo en cuenta que de acuerdo con el convenio, cada inscripción de los llamados avisos de garantías nacionales, que obviamente por su propia definición son garantías no internacionales, garantías nacionales, y por eso lo que se inscribe no es la garantía, sino un aviso de garantía nacional. Lo que está diciendo aquí la declaración española, o se debería entender así, que los avisos de garantías nacionales solo tiene sentido que entren por vía del punto nacional de acceso cuando sean garantías nacionales españolas. No podrían entrar un aviso de garantía nacional creado con respecto a la ley de otro estado a través del punto de acceso español. Y esto es interesante porque esto quiere decir que independientemente del hecho de que el deudor estuviera ubicado en España. Es decir, hay un punto de conexión puramente territorial que nos conecta con el punto de acceso, ¿verdad? Pero los avisos de garantías nacionales tienen un tratamiento diferente y es que esto deriva de que el propio reglamento, el propio protocolo, precisamente limita la posibilidad de extender el ámbito de aplicación de los registros de los puntos de acceso nacionales a los avisos de garantías nacionales. Entonces, ¿cómo cerramos el círculo? Pues yo creo que la única manera es entender que lo que está diciendo la declaración española es que si hubiera avisos de garantías nacionales sujeta a legislación nacional, el punto de acceso es la legislación española y, por tanto, estaría justificada la intervención del punto de entrada. Más allá de esto, no podríamos exigir un código de autorización para la inscripción de un aviso de garantía nacional creada conforme a una ley diferente a la española. No sé si con esto, José Luis, crees que podremos abrir un pequeño debate y discutir estas cuestiones o cualquier otra que pueda surgir y así nos detenemos un poco en el punto de acceso español. ¿Te parece, José Luis?
Sí.
El registrador, don José María de Pablos, quisiera intervenir.
Buenas tardes. Lo que planteas, Teresa, es muy interesante, pero tenemos que tener en cuenta varias cuestiones. La primera es que la situación ni siquiera tecnológica es igual a la que había hace unos años. Y eso también tiene su importancia. En tu magnífico trabajo, en el punto de epígrafe 94, ya hablas de la posibilidad de que se transmita desde el registro de bienes muebles la comunicación. No es incompatible con que se pueda dar un código. Es decir, no es incompatible que el registro pueda actuar también como transmisor de la información. No sé exactamente cómo quedará, porque creo que esto, creo que cuando entre en vigor el día 8, pues es muy probable que entre con un sistema muy parecido al que tenemos para aeronaves y habrá que rodarlo, pero yo creo que habrá que pensar en avanzar un poco más sobre el sistema que actualmente hay para las aeronaves. Creo que se pueden hacer ahora mismo más cosas. Los medios técnicos y tecnológicos que tenemos ahora no son los que había hace no tanto tiempo. Por otra parte, como hemos comentado anteriormente, todos los registros, incluido el registro de bienes muebles, estamos ahora mismo inmersos en un proceso de digitalización muy duro. Tenemos el 9 de mayo tenemos nuestro Big One particular, por el cual lo más llamativo es que los registros de la propiedad mercantil y bienes muebles dejan de tener el soporte papel y pasan a un soporte completamente electrónico. Esto es lo más llamativo, pero por dentro significa que se pueden hacer muchísimas más cosas de forma diferente y que un registro electrónico da muchísimas posibilidades de interoperar, ¿sí?, que tiene un registro, digamos, un modelo en papel. En cuanto a la utilización del código y la centralización, como has comentado, en el tema de aeronaves, tenemos una normativa interna que determina la competencia exclusiva del registro de bienes muebles de Madrid. Sin embargo, eso no existe en material ferroviario. En principio, sí tendríamos que tener en cuenta el punto de conexión del domicilio del director. Como digo, pues todo esto habrá que irlo rodando un poco. No es problema que se pudieran utilizar o que pudieran ser competentes diferentes registros desde Madrid, que no fuese un solo registro competente, porque un sistema muy parecido está operando ahora mismo en los registros mercantiles con los códigos ley. Y sin embargo, digamos que está centralizada la gestión del código ley, independientemente de que el registro competente teórico es el del domicilio de la sociedad que lo va a obtener. Entonces, yo creo que estamos en una fase probablemente diferente de la del protocolo aeronáutico. Creo que el propio texto da pie a que se pueda hacer una interpretación, digamos, a lo mejor más generosa. Y creo que lo más importante es ganar en eficiencia. Yo creo que si el registro puede ocuparse de hacer más cosas y de hacer determinadas operaciones que puedan llegar a ser transparentes para los usuarios, pues creo que ganaremos en eficiencia. Y como hemos comentado también anteriormente, el registro internacional es un registro de prioridades. Un registro que determina prioridad, con lo cual el tiempo cuenta, ¿sí? Con lo cual, todas las operaciones que dilaten ese tiempo serán operaciones que de alguna manera hay que revisar. Eso es un poco lo que hasta lo que sabemos en este momento, pues podemos decir.
Muchas gracias. Hay dos puntos que ahora traduciré para que Howard y Benjamin sigan, porque es especialmente relevante. El primero es en qué medida la declaración, tal y como está redactada, predetermina de forma inevitable un modelo autorizante que replique el aeronáutico. Y esto es muy importante porque, de hecho, esto ha sido un importante obstáculo cuando se elaboraron el reglamento, el regulation, el procedure del protocolo ferroviario, que hubo que reconocer de manera expresa el modelo de registro de punto de entrada autorizante, porque en realidad ni el convenio ni el protocolo hablan de un modelo autorizante. Entonces, concibiendo casos como el de España, se ha incorporado de forma expresa. Quizá, como bien dices, desde el punto de vista tecnológico, la posibilidad de que se convierta en un punto de entrada directo podría incluso caber dentro de la declaración tal y como está redactada.
Yo creo que no es incompatible que sea autorizante y que pueda ser...
Lo que ocurre es que autorizante solo tiene sentido porque me das un código para que yo lo use. Pero directo quiere decir que yo te doy la información para que tú lo transmitas. O que el código lo transmites tú. Esas cuestiones habría que ver en qué medida esto puede añadir complicaciones o, por el contrario, facilitar a través de una interoperabilidad plena la conexión del punto de acceso con el registro.
Yo creo que la visión tiene que ser facilitadora. De alguna manera también somos responsables de que la visión que demos sea facilitar las cosas. Entonces, yo creo que habrá que utilizar, la redacción no es exactamente igual que la del protocolo aeronáutico. Existen algunas diferencias. Habrá que estudiar esas diferencias en beneficio de la eficiencia.
Y hay otra cuestión, que así ya traduzco todo porque es una cuestión que se ha planteado en todos los debates previos. Otra cuestión importante es, estamos pensando en un punto de entrada absolutamente automatizado, operable 24 horas al día, 7 días a la semana. Decías con razón, este tipo de operaciones requieren disponibilidad inmediata, es decir, un retraso puede implicar una pérdida o una dilación de la prioridad. Vamos a contar con ese tipo de modelo y si no, cómo resolvemos cuestiones como necesito hoy domingo a las 3 de la tarde un código, no lo tengo, inscribo y después subsano con un código ulteriormente, por ejemplo. Si no está el 8 de marzo a las 12 de la noche disponible el sistema, si el 9 quiero inscribir, puedo inscribir y alego que el código no estaba disponible, por tanto que ya no lo necesito, porque no es una cuestión que me competa a mí como acreedor o deudor, sino al Estado parte que no ha cumplido con la puesta en marcha del sistema. Esas pequeñas cuestiones pueden surgir. No sé si te parece que ya hay una solución rápida, es decir, efectivamente, que sea 24 horas, automatizado, 7 días a la semana, y por tanto estas cuestiones no se van a dar en ningún caso, porque si no hay que tener reglas previstas en el reglamento y en los procedures.
Yo creo que eso tiene una solución. Es decir, ahora mismo si el código se genera de forma automatizada o si la transmisión se hace de forma autónoma automatizada, es que tenemos primero que ver el modelo. Y una vez que tengamos el modelo, las soluciones tecnológicas son posibles para casi todo. Ahora mismo hablando del registro de bienes muebles, que yo conozco, y en temas de garantías de maquinaria industrial, en cualquier momento, 24 horas al día, 7 días a la semana, se puede presentar en el registro de bienes muebles. Después ya viene una operación interna que ya puede ser diferente, en este caso, a como es digamos, en operaciones habituales del registro. Pero yo creo que una vez definido el modelo, tecnológicamente se puede hacer casi todo. Y hay medios y hay posibilidades para hacerlo, pero tenemos que definir el modelo. Realmente, los registradores y los registros haremos lo que se acuerde o nos digan que tengamos que hacer. Yo lo único que pienso es que si tenemos posibilidades de ir más allá, deberíamos investigarlas. Es un poco el resumen.
Muchas gracias. 3 main ideas, because you are going to be interested in. The first one is that the declaration in the Spanish version is not so clearly creating and authorizing entry points, say authorize and will transmit or shall transmit. So this is the first idea. The second idea, from a technological point of view, the registry would be absolutely able to directly and on an interoperability basis to send the information, transmit the information instead of issuing the authorizing code. It is very interesting because that would avoid completely the problem of creating authorizing entry point in addition to direct entry point. And the third idea is that that could be a totally automated, electronic automated system that could be imperative 24 hours, 7 days. So avoiding delays, avoiding problems of invalidating or risk of invalidation the registration because of the lack of code. So apparently there are possibilities to minimize the risk that we have been discussing.
Can I respond to this? Yeah. Okay. So first, I can only go by the declaration as I read it, and it clearly, to me at least, uses a system of an authorizing code, and it doesn't designate the registry of movable goods as a direct entry point. And that doesn't seem to be in the declaration. Okay. I mean, they don't use the expression direct entry point in Spanish either.
No.
That may be something that one can work on, because a declaration that's been made today doesn't mean that it's set in concrete and it can't be changed. The governments are always able to alter the way that the declarations work. They don't have retrospective effect, but they do have prospects.
In Spanish, the movable registry will be the entry point, authorizing entry point, through which the information will be transmitted to the international registry. So we thought this is a kind of confusing combination of two opposing models, authorizing but at the same time shall transmit. And the model that could be implemented in Spain from a technological point of view could be clearly be more and more inclined towards the direct entry.
Right. Can I respond to that? Yeah. I mean, obviously that's very interesting. If it's a direct entry point, then there has to be a clear agreement between the international registry and the registry here, because the integrity of the system has to be guaranteed. Okay, so I once had a discussion some years ago with the then head of the European Railway Agency, and he floated an idea that people could make registrations through the ERA. And I said, that's fine, you can do that, as long as you guarantee and you're legally liable if for any reason you don't hand on the registrations. Because if you don't, and somebody else makes a direct registration, that changes the priority of the creditors, and therefore you have a legal liability if that goes wrong. And then he said, actually, no, I don't think this is a good idea after all.
Eso es una cuestión, José Luis, por favor, toma toda la palabra. Quiero decir que esa cuestión es también interesante, muy pertinente, ¿no? ¿En qué medida un punto de entrada directo expone al registro español a una responsabilidad importante? Cualquier pérdida de datos, retraso en la inscripción, error, incluso medidas ataques de ciberseguridad que pudieran bloquear durante unos minutos el acceso, pudiera generar, imaginaos, retrasos de prioridad en multitud de acreedores. La responsabilidad, que no es tan grave en casos de código autorizante, porque siempre puedes decir, vale, pero yo inscribo antes y luego ya verás cómo lo resuelvo, ¿no? Puede agravarse significativamente con el punto directo. Es otra cosa que yo creo que hay que añadir, ¿no? al análisis de cuestiones relevantes. ¿Te parece, José Luis?
Sí, es muy interesante la conversación, el debate y yo creo la flexibilidad que demuestra el registro en el diseño de un modelo que hay que ver y que hay que diseñar y que será testado en la práctica, ¿no? Yo creo que ese es el mensaje en el que además, bueno, pues en base a una declaración que, como dice Howard, no está escrita en cemento, sino que deja ahí elementos sobre los cuales se puede construir en búsqueda de un sistema tecnológicamente eficiente y que permita, pues, quizá un acceso 24/7, eso sería lo ideal. Creo que Laura tenía alguna observación.
Claro, yo lo único que iba a decir es que la práctica del protocolo aeronáutico, la práctica es que el registro solo está disponible para dar códigos de 9 a 5. Y si me apuras, a veces de 9 a 5. Y en ningún caso los códigos se pueden otorgar en el momento. Tienen que entrar en el libro diario, cerrar el libro diario y hasta el día siguiente no se están dando los códigos, en el mejor de los casos, un poco con la salvedad de que no hay un periodo máximo para emitirlos. En la práctica, la verdad que el registro está haciendo un esfuerzo de otorgarlos de un día para otro, pero bueno, nunca está muy claro, nunca hay la 100% certeza de que se vayan a otorgar de un día para otro, pero que yo creo que con la experiencia previa al protocolo aeronáutico, el que sea 24/7, estamos muy lejos. No sé, si su opinión es que se puede, sería una...
Vamos a ver, es que depende un poco de cómo se define desde el principio todo el proceso. Depende de cómo se define desde el proceso. Ahora mismo, yo soy el profesor de escuelas de Sevilla. A mí una de las aeronaves me coge muchísimo. Yo soy más de buques, pero entonces no sé exactamente cuál es la operativa, pero sí sé que si hay una definición concreta de una operativa que se acuerde, se pueden hacer muchas cosas. Desde luego, no sé cómo se está mandando, por ejemplo, ahora las peticiones al registro de bienes muebles. Creo que hay que descargarse una hoja y mandarla, etcétera. Creo que todo el proceso o el procedimiento creo que podría ser mejorable y a lo mejor ahora tenemos una oportunidad también de mejorar no solamente los procesos que puedan resultar del protocolo ferroviario, sino también intentar mejorar procesos que ya tenemos y que, bueno, pues están ahí, de alguna manera funcionan como tal, pero que a lo mejor se les puede inducir elementos de eficiencia, que a lo mejor no son 7/24, pero a lo mejor conseguimos mucho más de lo que hay ahora. Entonces, si no nos ponemos unos objetivos, digamos, un poco exigentes, pues a mejor las necesitamos.
Muchas gracias. Another point, maybe we could talk about it, Teresa. I'm sorry for taking the lead. Was looking at the legal topics on the pre-existing international interests. Spain has also made a declaration on Article 60, which is very pertinent, which and which is quite unexplored maybe in the aircraft sector. Would you like to develop on that? And because I believe that it's going to be quite relevant for existing portfolios.
Thank you, José Luis. So Spain has made another declaration, very well indeed formulated and drafted, and is based on Article 60 of the Convention. And the formulation of this declaration in Spanish now is: el Reino de España declara que la Convención será aplicable a las garantías preexistentes sobre el material rodante ferroviario a los efectos de determinar la prioridad al día siguiente del tercer aniversario de la fecha en que esta declaración entre en vigor. Es decir, we open an interim period of 3 years within the advisable action, the strategy should be to register the pre-existing interest in the international registry during that period of 3 years in order to guarantee that the priority is preserved. Once this period is exhausted, and therefore the convention applies with the priority over all the pre-existing right, if there is no other competing right registered within this period, the best strategy should be to create a new agreement, therefore a new interest that is going to be an international interest, fully subject to the convention, and register it accordingly. That would be Howard.
Yeah.
So, esta sería la fórmula o la estrategia idónea para utilizar adecuadamente este periodo transitorio que, en virtud del artículo 60, España ha optado por aplicar durante un periodo de 3 años. Es decir, animar como estrategia fundamental a inscribir todos los derechos preexistentes, las garantías preexistentes durante este periodo de transición. Esta es la garantía de que no se pierde, de que se preserva esa prioridad, pero lo óptimo sería que una vez finalizado ese periodo, entonces sabiendo que ya no hay riesgo de intereses conflictivos inesperados, entonces realmente iniciar un contrato nuevo con la creación, por tanto, emergente a partir de ese momento de una auténtica garantía internacional, sujeta al convenio en plenitud. Es una estrategia que parece importante advertir, porque si no se puede producir una pérdida de expectativas si no se da uno cuenta que transcurrida el periodo de transición realmente hacemos una aplicación plena con todas las consecuencias del protocolo.
El plazo de 3 años es desde el 8 de marzo.
Yes. So the beginning of the period is when the declaration enters into force.
Yes.
Because the declaration has been made at the very beginning together with the ratification, so it's not a subsequent declaration. The start date is indeed 8th of March.
Right. Yes. Can I just explain the dilemma that lies behind this? Because then you'll see the subtlety of this. Professor Sir Roy Good, who's the father of this whole construction of the Cape Town Convention and the various protocols, he said to me that Article 60 he thought was one of his great failures because on the aircraft protocol nobody used it. And I'm pleased to say that all the indications are that on the rail protocol that won't be the case. And what we did on the rail protocol, which came a little later than the aircraft protocol anyway, was that we tidied up quite a lot of the language in Article 60. And we introduced a system which said that if a declaration is made, the state making the declaration has to select a period, no shorter than 3 years, no longer than 10 years, during which, after which a pre-existing interest loses its priority if it's not registered as a pre-existing interest. Now, the dilemma here is that your natural inclination is to say, okay, we've got a 10-year lease, it was signed last year, and so therefore, at the time it was signed, the protocol was not in force, and therefore the rights of a lessor are not covered by the Luxembourg Rail Protocol, because it's not, at the time it wasn't an international interest. So you could, in theory, you could register the lease as an interest, but it doesn't qualify as an international interest. So the natural inclination would be to say, oh, that's okay. We have maybe a further assurances clause in the lease contract, or we could negotiate with the lessee that we will tear up the old lease, put in a new lease on exactly the same terms. Obviously, the period would be shorter, but on exactly the same terms, commencing on the 8th of March. And there we are. We as the lessor now have all the rights under the Luxembourg Rail Protocol. The difficulty is the pre-existing rights, because if you tear up the old lease, you lose your priority from the original lease. Therefore, if somebody else is sitting out there with pre-existing rights, you've actually subordinated your position to those pre-existing rights. And therefore, what makes sense is for anybody who's written a lease prior to the 8th of March, register that lease as a pre-existing interest, wait for the 3 years to expire, and you'll see if anybody else has registered a pre-existing interest. If nobody else has registered a pre-existing interest, it's gone. And then you can re-execute the lease, obviously with a shorter period. You re-execute the lease and the lessor has all the rights under the protocol, which it doesn't get when it just registers a pre-existing right or interest. It only has the priority. It doesn't get all the other rights that accrue under the protocol. And what we tried to do when drafting this protocol was to we wanted to make the registry as inclusive as possible. We wanted a scenario to arise where, after a limited period of time, anybody purchasing or financing rolling stock, let's say here in Spain, would look at the registry, and if he could not see anybody making a claim on the registry against that asset, he could be 100% sure that there were no other enforceable rights. Whereas if you don't operate that system, if you don't make a declaration, then those pre-existing rights could be out there as a matter of domestic law for 20, 30 years, which means that no creditor, no purchaser would ever have 100% certainty. So that was the logic behind it, and Spain has made the perfect declaration. It's absolutely what we recommend, and what we're recommending to other governments around the world. And I think you can see, for example, South Africa, when it ratifies in the next few weeks, you'll see also they make the identical registration. But that's the dilemma that one's trying to deal with. You can't have two leases running at the same time on the same asset between the same parties. If you do a new lease and you don't extinguish the old one, then it's a matter of law, probably it does extinguish it. So that's the dilemma, and that's the easiest way that we see to get your way through that dilemma.
What about contractual clauses? What type of local protections are we going to look into? We're used to using the irrevocable powers of attorney. I think this is something that is, because we know that the data is not an issue, a tool under the Rail Protocol. Anyone wants to explain why? Because I guess there is an explanation of why this was not envisaged originally in the protocol. Maybe some people will miss it because they always thought it was the Holy Grail. And the second idea would be, well, even if there's not one, we could put together one. If it's recommended under local law, sort of notarized the local power.
I'll start, and then I'll hand over. I mean, sure. The idea problem, the source of that was the fact that you had national aircraft registries and you have the international registry, and you have to try and reconcile the two. We don't have that issue on the rail side. And so therefore, any order to transfer title or to remove security interest under the protocol doesn't need to apply to a local registry. So there's no impact there. The power of attorney that you might want to have could be very important. And I tell you where it becomes really important, and it's arguably a wrinkle, if I can use that expression, in the convention. If you have a head lease and a sublease, then it's always clear that the creditor can discharge the interest. Okay? So unless you assign the right to discharge, the creditor has the right. So under the head lease, if there's an international interest registered, the head lessor has the right to discharge. However, what about the sublease? Does the head lessor have the right to discharge the sublease? And the answer is no. So there you have to have some sort of authority that goes back to the head lessor from the head lessee saying, dear head lessor, you can exercise my rights as the sublessor to be able to remove the underlying international interest which relates to the sublease. So I agree, powers of attorney could be really important.
Quizá esto es una cuestión interesante para hablar con respecto a todos aquellos que tenéis experiencia práctica, ¿no? Fijaos, en el artículo 7 del protocolo ferroviario no se habla de IDERA y se dice expresamente que, in addition to the remedies specified in the convention, the creditor may procure the export and physical transfer of railroad stock from the territory in which it is situated. Y solo en el párrafo 5 es cuando dice que, subject to any applicable law, there is an obligation of the authorities to cooperate in order to make the remedies effective. Por tanto, no hay ningún mecanismo de base contractual convencional que facilite el ejercicio pleno de este remedio de exportación y transferencia física del equipo. Y por eso pensábamos, y eso es una cuestión que José Luis planteaba previamente, que esta idea del irrevocable power of attorney parece absolutamente consustancial, ¿no? Que forme parte de este tipo de acuerdos, porque no hay ningún otro mecanismo, nada más y nada menos, IDERA, con la fuerza que tiene, que está avalado por una convención, que no sea utilizar poder irrevocable o cláusulas contractuales que fundamentalmente solo garantizan interpartes un compromiso que, llegado el momento, si no se cumple, salvo que cuentes con un poder irrevocable, difícilmente lo vas a poder ejecutar con la rapidez que necesitas, ¿no? No sé si tenéis alguna experiencia más, aquellos que trabajáis en ese sector, que veáis interesante comentar.
Bueno, que yo creo que ahí creará el problema del alcance y de la negociación del irrevocable o del registration power of attorney, que se negociará entre las partes y entonces habrá margen de negociación y dependiendo de las partes que estén negociando tendrá una posición más fuerte o más débil. Lo que es verdaderamente potente de IDERA es que es un texto absolutamente tasado y un papelito y tú vas con ese papelito y es automático. Y al principio había mucho miedo de que no fuera tan automático, de hecho nosotros hemos seguido en muchos casos pidiendo los dos, el de Registration Power of Attorney y el IDERA, también porque no estaba claro si para registrar una aeronave tenías que ir antes a bienes muebles, porque no podías ir a aeronaves directamente, hasta qué punto, y el IDERA no valía para bienes muebles, sino que valía para aeronaves, hasta qué punto te iba a valer, el IDERA no te iba a valer para bienes muebles. Entonces, tener el de Registration para bienes muebles y luego tener el IDERA para aeronaves. Pero con el paso de los años y la práctica, sí que, bueno, aeronaves ya se ha convencido de que el IDERA es lo que es y que tiene el poder que tiene y que aunque les dé miedo, esa es la llave con la que tú vas a aeronaves y justificando que ha habido un incumplimiento, que luego ahí está, digamos, la letra pequeña. O sea, hasta ahora lo que se ha aceptado, tampoco ha habido mucha ejecución de IDERA, no con no acuerdo de las partes. Pero lo que se ha aceptado es que fueran casos de impago reiterado en 3 mensualidades y que se hubiera mandado, se hubiera acreditado fehacientemente la reclamación del pago. Todos los demás casos no. Con lo cual, también ha habido un margen de interpretación en la ejecución de Unidera. Pero lo que sí que, claro, está mucho más abierto es si no hay un instrumento tasado y cerrado por el protocolo, pues no todos los poderes de registro serán igual de efectivos, probablemente.
Sí, pero lo ha mencionado Teresa, de registro. Bueno,
¿De dónde?
Claro. Efectivamente,
claro.
O sea, no estamos hablando de un registro quizá tan vigoroso como el de las aeronaves que
no,
necesitas
es más el aspecto de reposeer.
Para exportarlo, sino para saltarte un poco el principio de que no puede nadie ser desposeído en contra de su voluntad, es decir, que del Código Civil, ¿no? De decir, ¿no?
Bueno,
un self-measure, de decir, oye, has incumplido, devuélveme el
y que eso también con el IDERA, en la práctica, los casos que hemos visto de verdad ejecutar un IDERA, tampoco te garantiza el IDERA la reposesión de la aeronave, porque la posesión no la vas a conseguir por ejecutar un IDERA. O sea, de hecho ahí siempre nos vimos en la situación de, bueno, pues habrá que ver. O sea, ya era más la conexión de que la Agencia de Seguridad en Vuelo notificara, que la Guardia Civil fuera, precintara la aeronave. La reposición como tal no la recuperabas automáticamente.
Sí, sí.
Lo que pasa es que, bueno, sí que es verdad que consiguiendo el efecto de la baja de la matrícula, esa aeronave no puede volar, con lo cual estás consiguiendo movilizarla. Y ya ahí, pues ya te irás donde está la aeronave y utilizarás otros medios para conseguir la reposesión efectiva. Aquí efectivamente es más complicado, pero también es verdad que tienes la facilidad de que estos bienes no son tan movibles como otros. No se te van a escapar tan rápido.
Y pensad que fundamentalmente está centrado en la idea de exportar. O sea, tú lo que quieres es recuperar, o sea, hacer una transferencia física, ¿no? Físicamente, pero luego la idea de la exportación, y ahí es donde tiene sentido, ¿no? Que las autoridades competentes cooperen, colaboren, ¿no? Eso es clave, porque no muchas veces donde te falla todo es en el momento en que quieres exportar.
Sí, pero aquí no va a ser fácil, o sea, no es tan fácil exportar un tren cuando tienes una anchevía que no te... Claro, es que tienes una imposibilidad material que no tienes con una aeronave, porque una aeronave mañana está en un país africano y échale un cargo.
Yo creo que estamos terminando con el tiempo. Howard's going to have some final
remarks. There's a couple of things I just want to draw attention to. Just obviously on the idea, I hope we've understood that because there's no national registry, it's a different situation. But in terms of the contract provisions, if you're writing a lease on the 9th of March, you must have a provision in there that says we will the lessee will obtain a Bovis number for each of the items of railway rolling stock and affix them in accordance with the model rules, because that's what gives you the ability to register that interest at the international registry. And that takes me back to another point, which I think that there are two interesting distinctions between the aircraft protocol and the rail protocol. I just want to draw to your attention. You can, under the rail protocol, create an international interest over an undefined group of assets. You can't do that under the aircraft protocol. Now, as an English lawyer, I call that a floating charge. But so I can say, this is under Article 5 of the protocol, I can say, or if I'm the bank, I can say, I'm taking a pledge over all of your rolling stock. I don't need to identify it. I can just say all of your rolling stock. And as such, that creates an international interest over all of that rolling stock. So the rights under the protocol already accrue to the creditor at that point. So the international interest has been created, different to the aircraft registry, protocol. But there's the international interest and there's the registration of the international interest. You cannot register that international interest at the international registry unless you identify it. For obvious reasons, what do you register? So if you've got to register against the Orbis number, you have to have each individual item clearly identified to make the registration. But it doesn't mean that you don't have an international interest. And one of the things that we've been grappling with actually quite recently, this is hopelessly obscure, about the assignment of non-registered international interests. And that can happen. And we've had to provide for it in the regulations. So that's the first point I wanted to make. The second point I wanted to make was that you may have noticed that Kathy, in her presentation, just at one point mentioned something called a notice of caution. And I don't know whether any of you picked this up, and you're thinking to yourself, what on earth is a notice of caution? Okay. This is something very different to the aircraft protocol. Let me explain the problem, because I've been directly involved with this as a practicing lawyer in relation to aircraft. So I had a situation where my client owned an aircraft. It was a corporate jet, and this is a big bank. There was a dispute with the operator, and the operator sought to file a non-consensual right of interest against the aircraft on a specious argument that there was some sort of lien on the aircraft because of money being lent at some point. He produced no evidence of this, but nonetheless he registered the interest in that non-consensual right of interest. And so we had to battle through the Irish courts for 8 months until we finally managed to get that interest discharged from the registry, because what is clear is that under Article 44 of the Convention, only the courts in the location of the registry have jurisdiction to make any orders against the registrar. So the registrar couldn't move the registration, even though he knew it was a sham, it was a fraud. We had to go through the court process, and it took us 8 months to get that interest removed at a significant cost, into 6 figures in dollars, with no ability to get the money back, because the company that made the registration was I think it was a single-purpose company that had no value. Okay, so we were determined to avoid that problem happening on the Rail Protocol. So what we have introduced is a system where somebody wishing to register unilaterally an interest, so it's a pre-existing right of interest or a non-consensual right of interest, he has to provide documentary evidence of that claim, and the registrar has to be satisfied prima facie that that does show that there is a genuine claim. In other words, it gives the registrar the ability to stop individuals taking hostages by registering a non-consensual right of interest, knowing that it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of money to remove them. So what happens there is that the registrar receives the request for the unilateral registration. He immediately puts a caution on the register saying, I've received this request, but I'm not registering it yet. I have to look at the paperwork and be satisfied that there's prima facie evidence that this claim is justified. As long as I'm satisfied, then I will release the caution, and it becomes a registration with the time effect of the date that the caution is registered. If, on the other hand, the documentary evidence is not satisfactory, he throws it back at the party trying to make the registration, and he removes the caution. So he can do it because the registration has not yet been made. As soon as he makes the registration, only the court can order the removal of that registration. So that's quite an important nuance that we've introduced into the regulations, which you'll see operating, and hopefully that will act as a discouragement for people trying to, how can I put it, strengthen their negotiating position by unilaterally, maliciously, in one way or another, filing a registration of an interest as a unilateral interest, which actually doesn't work.
But that analysis, it's only for unilateral interest.
Yes. Yes.
Because I understand that the other international interests
you need consent.
You need consent to the debtor. So there is no analysis by the registrar.
Correct. Okay. It's only if those two are unilateral positions where the debtor is not asked to consent.
Like substituting the fact that there is no other party to consent.
Correct, correct. And you know, on the aircraft registry, on the aircraft regulations now, there is a provision that says that the unilateral registrant, the party making the unilateral registration, has to provide documentary evidence. This is quite new on the reg. It's only in the last edition of the aircraft regulations. But then we asked the registrar the question, well, what do you do? He said, well, look at it. So what? I mean, it makes no difference. I said to the registrar, I said, this could be a laundry bill. It could be anything. It could be a till receipt from Pret a Manger, because he's not required. He has no power to actually make a judgment in relation to the evidence being provided. So that's quite a significant difference, and I would say improvement that we've made on the against the operation of the aircraft regulations. Look, we could go on for hours. I can't tell you how many hours I've spent on this, but the more you go into the protocol, the more you begin to understand it, the more you realise that it's got a lot of nuances in it. It's got a lot of thought behind it, and particularly when you see the regulations, you'll see that we work very hard with the registrar. I mean, this has been a team effort, working very hard with them to actually make sure that the rights of the creditors are protected as much as possible, but in a fair and reasonable way, and in such a way that we can be proud of the end result. But at the end of the day, it means that the creditor will be able to have the benefit of the protocol, that he will be able to register his interest, so everyone can see that he's got the benefit of the protocol, and hopefully that's the principal thing that leads to the economic benefits that we think will emerge as the registry goes into operation in 10 days' time. So from my side, I just would like to say thank you to my colleagues here. Teresa, thank you. Most people don't realise that Teresa has just come off a plane from Tokyo. I mean, I can't imagine how you can stay awake. But thank you, and thank you for making the effort to be here. But thank you all for being here as well. We're about to embark on a fascinating train ride, and I hope you all enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you, and muchas gracias a todos, y muchas gracias por venir, y hasta siempre. Seguimos en contacto.